The Lost City of Antarctica by Irwin Montrose. Chapter 1. The Signal in the Ice. The sky over Cambridge was painted in muted gray, the kind of sky that heralded autumn's slow descent into winter. Dr. Alice Hammond sat in her cluttered office, illuminated only by the pale glow of her computer screen. Papers covered every surface: geological surveys, satellite data, and printed reports. Somewhere beneath the chaos was a half-empty mug of tea, long forgotten. She was staring at satellite imagery of Antarctica, her expertise in glaciology giving her a well-trained eye for reading the endless expanse of white. These days, the images held more than just academic interest. The world was watching the southern continent's dramatic transformation, as warming temperatures caused glaciers to retreat at an unprecedented pace. Every day, the ice revealed something new. Sometimes fossils, sometimes bizarre formations carved by ancient winds. But this was different. Alice squinted at her monitor. A new batch of data had just come in, and something about it was wrong. The image showed a large geometric shadow beneath the ice. Perfectly straight lines, angles that were too precise to be natural. Her pulse quickened as she adjusted the contrast, her mouse hovering over the anomaly. "Dr. Hammond?" Tom, her graduate assistant, leaned in through the open doorway, holding a stack of files. He was young, bright, and often too eager, but in this moment, his curiosity mirrored her own. She waved him over, her voice tight. "Look at this. What do you see?" Tom leaned down, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. That looks like a city." Alice's mouth was dry. "Not just a city, a massive one, and it's buried under hundreds of meters of ice." Tom straightened up, looking uneasy. "Should I notify the team?" "Not yet." Alice's voice was firm that she needed more data before making any declarations. The last thing she wanted was to jump to conclusions, especially given her father's legacy. He had been laughed out of scientific circles for his claims about a hidden Antarctic civilization, a humiliation he never recovered from before his disappearance. Alice leaned forward, pulling up comparative scans. The lines of the structure were unmistakable. She cross-referenced the coordinates with historical data, geological surveys, and maps of ice flow patterns. Nothing explained this. It wasn't a natural ridge nor a buried mountain range. It was deliberate. "Tom, compile this data and send it to my colleagues at the Australian Antarctic Division. Encrypt it and don't tell anyone outside our network. If we're right about this," she stopped herself, unwilling to complete the thought. Tom hesitated. "If we're right about this, what?" Alice met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then history just changed. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The icy wind howled across the deck of the Aurora Austral, an Australian icebreaker ship cutting through the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean. Snow swirled in angry gusts, stinging the faces of the crew as they worked to secure the last of the expedition's equipment. Inside the ship's warm cabin, the expedition team was gathered, their faces lit by the dim overhead lights and the glowing maps on a central screen. Captain Sophie Torrance stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding despite her unassuming height. She tapped a pen against the surface, waiting for the chatter to die down. "All right, listen up," Sophie began, her tone brisk. "We're headed into one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. Whatever you think you signed up for, double it. Extreme cold, shifting ice, and zero margin for error. If you're not ready to follow orders, you're a liability." There was a beat of silence. Then Dr. Vijay Nair, seated near the end of the table, raised a hand. "Not to undermine your terrifying speech, Captain, but some of us are here to study history, not reenact the thing." A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Sophie's lips twitched, but she didn't smile. "Just make sure your history doesn't get us killed." Alice, seated beside Vijay, shifted uncomfortably. While she appreciated Sophie's pragmatism, the captain's tone felt like a challenge. This mission wasn't a military exercise. It was a chance to rewrite the understanding of human civilization. Clearing her throat, Alice leaned forward. "Captain, I understand the risks, but the data we're heading toward, it's unprecedented. What we've found under the ice could be—" Sophie cut her off. "I know what you're looking for, Dr. Hammond, and I'll do everything in my power to get you there. But my priority is getting all of you back alive." The unspoken tension settled over the room as Sophie moved to the helm to oversee their course. The team. As the ship carved its way toward Antarctica, The team members fell into their routines. In the cramped quarters of the research bay, Tyler Reeve adjusted the rotors on a drone with careful precision, his fingers flying across the controls. Despite his technical genius, Tyler often felt out of place among the older, more accomplished scientists. "Hey, Tyler," called Amir Khan, his voice calm but firm as he approached. The climate scientist had a way of speaking that made people listen, even if his words carried a quiet warning. "Is that the drone you're testing for deep crevasse mapping?" "Yeah," Tyler replied, not looking up. "Why?" Amir raised an eyebrow. "Because I saw you testing it in the hallway earlier. If this thing's the only way we can scout dangerous areas, I'd like it to survive the trip." Tyler's cheeks flushed. "Relax, Professor. I've got it under control." Amir sighed. "Just remember, the ice doesn't care how smart you are. It'll kill you just the same." Across the ship, Alice and Vijay huddled over a table covered in satellite images. The sharp geometric patterns beneath the ice were impossible to ignore. "You think it's a city?" Vijay asked, his voice tinged with awe. "I don't just think," Alice said, her eyes shining with conviction. "I know." The storm 3 days into their journey, the ship entered the first storm. Waves slammed against the hull, and the deck pitched violently. Sophie barked orders from the bridge, her voice steady despite the chaos. In the hold, Alice clung to a handrail as equipment slid dangerously close to the walls. Vijay, beside her, managed a nervous laugh. "You sure this is worth it?" Alice didn't answer. Her thoughts were fixed on the anomaly beneath the ice. For years, she had searched for something to vindicate her father's theories. This was her chance to prove he hadn't been crazy and to reclaim her family's name from the whispers of disgrace. Arrival. When the storm finally passed, the ship pushed deeper into the icy expanse. The horizon stretched endlessly, a pristine white canvas interrupted only by jagged peaks of glacial ice. As they approached their destination, the mood on board shifted. Conversations grew quieter, and even Sophie seemed less terse. On the final approach, Alice stood at the bow, watching as the icebreaker plowed through the frozen sea. Somewhere out there, beneath kilometers of ice, lay the answers she had been chasing her entire life. "You ready for this?" Sophie's voice came from behind her. Alice turned to see the captain, her hands shoved into her jacket pockets. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," Alice admitted. Sophie nodded, her gaze distant. "Then just don't let it swallow you." The ship slowed as they reached the edge of the site. The next phase of the mission was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Ice Gives Way. The air outside the ship was impossibly cold, each breath biting and sharp. A vast expanse of glittering ice stretched out before the expedition team, its stark beauty masking the treacherous landscape beneath. They stood on the ice's surface, their breaths forming plumes of mist as the Antarctic wind whipped around them. Dr. Alice Hammond clutched her tablet, the screen displaying a blinking beacon overlaid on satellite imagery. This was the epicenter, the point where the anomaly lay buried. She adjusted the scarf wrapped around her face and turned to the team gathered around her. "This is it," she said, her voice muffled by layers of insulation. "Beneath us, possibly less than a kilometer down, is the structure we've been tracking. It's massive, spanning at least 15 square kilometers, and its geometric precision is unprecedented." Vijay, standing beside her, whistled low. "We're standing over an ancient metropolis." That's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Captain Sophie Torrance, arms crossed and every inch the figure of control, surveyed the group. "Let's keep it professional. No assumptions until we get real evidence." Alice ignored the captain's skepticism, turning back to the tablet. "We'll drill here," she said, pointing to a marked spot. "This is the best access point." The first drilling operation. Setting up the drilling rig was a slow, arduous process. Tyler Reeve worked tirelessly, his gloved hands fumbling with the drone controls as he calibrated the machinery. Each adjustment sent the drones into position to map subsurface layers of ice, their rotors kicking up a fine mist of frozen crystals. "This is a bad spot for drilling," Sophie muttered as she reviewed their positioning. "The ice here is thinner than I'd like. If it fractures, it won't," Alice cut in, her tone sharper than intended. "The data supports this location. Trust me." Sophie's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Your call, Doctor, but if the ice starts cracking, we're pulling out. No arguments." The drilling began, a cacophony of mechanical whirring and grinding echoing across the frozen landscape. Tyler watched the feed from the drone cameras, his focus absolute as the drill descended. After an hour, they reached the first milestone, 200 meters. Good progress, Amir noted, examining the thermal scans. The ice density matches what we expected. Another few hours, and we should hit the structure. Assuming it's still intact, Sophie added under her breath, her arms folded against the cold. The breakthrough at 800 meters, the drill abruptly stopped. Tyler's screen displayed a flashing red warning. "Something's wrong," he called out. "It's not cutting through anymore. Feels like we've hit something solid." Alice's heart raced as she moved to Tyler's side, peering at the feed. The drill's camera showed a dark, smooth surface beneath the ice. It wasn't rock. It wasn't ice. It was something else. "Pull the drill up," Alice ordered, her voice tight. "We need to see what we're dealing with." The team gathered around the monitor as the drill retracted. The camera focused on the surface below, revealing sharp, straight lines that formed a tessellated pattern. The material was unlike anything they'd seen, metallic, yet organic in its texture with a faint luminescence. "Is that writing?" Vijay asked, leaning closer. Etched into the surface were strange symbols, angular and flowing at the same time. "This isn't natural," Amir murmured, his breath fogging the screen. "This is a manufactured surface." Alice's eyes were wide, her voice almost a whisper. "It's a city." The fracture. Before anyone could react, a low rumble rolled beneath their feet. Sophie's head snapped up, her hand instinctively going to the radio on her shoulder. "Everyone back! Now!" The ice around the drill site groaned, spiderweb cracks radiating outward. Tyler scrambled to shut down the equipment, his movements frantic. The ground buckled, sending Alice stumbling into Vijay. "Move," Sophie bellowed, grabbing Alice by the arm and hauling her back towards solid ground. The cracks widened, and a section of the ice gave way with a deafening roar. The drilling rig toppled, disappearing into the dark void below. A cloud of ice shards exploded into the air, obscuring their vision. When the dust settled, the team stood at the edge of a massive chasm. Far below, faint lights glimmered in the darkness, illuminating the contours of a buried city. Spires jutted upward, their surfaces glinting with an otherworldly sheen. The symbols from the drill's camera were etched across every visible surface, glowing faintly like dying embers. No one spoke. The magnitude of what they were seeing left them breathless. Alice was the first to find her voice. "We need to get down there." "Not a chance," Sophie said, her tone brooking no argument. "The ice is unstable. One wrong step and we'll all go down with it." "But Captain, look at it," Alice gestured toward the ruins. "This is what we came here for. If we don't act now, the ice could cover it again, or worse, it could collapse completely." Sophie stared into the abyss, weighing the risks. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "We do this my way. No heroics. If anything feels off, we pull out." Alice nodded, her heart pounding. The first glimpse of the lost city was more than she had ever imagined, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the city hadn't been meant to be found. Chapter 4. Descent into Shadows. The team stood at the edge of the chasm, staring into the ghostly glow emanating from the city below. The air was heavy with anticipation and unease, the sheer scale of the discovery threatening to overwhelm them. Captain Sophie Torrance was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "We're setting up safety lines and a secure anchor point. No one goes down until I say so." Alice Hammond nodded, though her mind was racing ahead. The tantalizing glimpse of spires and alien patterns had ignited a fire within her. This was the discovery of a lifetime, and every second spent waiting felt like an eternity. Preparing for the descent, the team moved with a mix of urgency and caution, securing climbing ropes, harnesses, and carabiners. Tyler Reeve worked quickly, deploying a drone equipped with high-powered lights to scout the depths. On the screen, the city's architecture came into clearer focus. Towering structures with curved surfaces, interconnected by delicate bridges that defied gravity. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, their meaning a mystery. "It's beautiful," Vijay whispered, leaning closer to the monitor. "And impossible." Amir Khan, standing beside him, crossed his arms. "It's not impossible, just improbable. Advanced civilizations could have existed during earlier interglacial periods, but this changes everything." Sophie cut in, her tone brisk. Save the academic debate for later. Right now, our focus is getting down there safely. Alice glanced at Sophie, biting back a retort. She couldn't afford to alienate the captain, not when the mission's success depended on her. The descent. Sophie led the descent, testing each anchor point before signaling the others to follow. The climb was treacherous, the ice walls riddled with jagged edges and slick with melting frost. The faint glow from the city below cast eerie patterns on the ice, making the depths feel alive. Halfway down, Alice's boot slipped on a patch of ice, sending her swinging wildly against the wall. Her breath caught as the harness dug into her ribs. "Hold steady," Sophie barked from below. "Plant your feet and use the line." "I've got it," Alice shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. She pressed her boots into the ice, regaining her balance. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to keep going. Reaching the city. When the team finally reached the base of the chasm, they stood in silence, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the structures around them. The air was unnaturally still, the faint hum of the glowing symbols the only sound. Tyler's drone hovered nearby, its lights illuminating a massive archway carved into the nearest spire. The symbols etched into the stone pulsed faintly, as if responding to their presence. "Anyone else getting the feeling we shouldn't be here?" Tyler muttered, his voice low. "No," Vijay said, his eyes alight with wonder. "We were meant to find this." Sophie scanned the area, her hand resting on the pistol at her hip. "Stay close. We don't know what's down here." The first chamber. The team approached the archway, their footsteps crunching on the icy ground. As they passed beneath the arch, the temperature seemed to drop even further, their breaths forming thick clouds in the air. Inside, the chamber was vast, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a strange crystalline artifact. Alice stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the artifact. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what they left behind." "Careful," Amir warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Ignoring him, Alice reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the crystal. The moment she made contact, the room came alive. The carvings on the walls flared with light, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. "Step back," Sophie shouted, drawing her weapon. But it was too late. The hum grew louder, and the crystal began to pulse with energy. Alice stumbled backward as a holographic projection filled the chamber, showing scenes of the city's former inhabitants. Humanoid figures moved through the streets, their faces obscured, but their movements graceful and purposeful. The projection shifted, showing the city being engulfed by ice, its people scrambling in panic as an unseen catastrophe unfolded. The final image lingered, a symbol etched into the air, glowing brighter than the rest. Amir stepped forward, his voice hushed. "It's a warning." The uneasy exit. The glow faded, and the chamber fell silent once more. The team stood frozen, the weight of what they had witnessed sinking in. "We need to document this," Alice said, her voice trembling with urgency. "There's so much we don't understand, and there's no guarantee we'll live long enough to figure it out," Sophie snapped. "We're heading back to the surface." "But Captain," no arguments. Sophie's tone brooked no debate. "We regroup at the base and reassess. Whatever this place is, it's not stable." As they prepared to climb back to the surface, Alice cast one last look at the crystal. The warnings etched into the air replayed in her mind. Whatever had happened to this city, it wasn't natural, and she couldn't shake the feeling that history might be on the verge of repeating itself. Chapter 5: Echoes of the Past. The climb back to the surface was a grueling test of endurance. The ice walls felt steeper in the biting cold, and the team moved in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The discovery of the holographic projection weighed heavily on them, the images of the city's demise replaying like a warning they couldn't ignore. Dr. Alice Hammond reached the surface first, gasping for breath as she hauled herself over the edge. The wind had picked up, carrying a low, mournful whistle that seemed to echo from the chasm below. She turned to help Tyler Reeve, whose gear snagged on the ice as he struggled to pull himself up. "Got it," Tyler exclaimed, tumbling onto the surface with a relieved grin. His humor faded quickly as he looked back at the chasm. "That city, it's alive, isn't it? Not in the way we think of life, but something's still there." Alice nodded, brushing ice from her jacket. We need to understand what it's trying to tell us. Behind them, Captain Sophie Torrance emerged, her sharp gaze scanning the horizon. Right now, we need to focus on surviving. Whatever's down there can wait until we're in a secure position. Returning to base, the team trudged back to their temporary base camp, a cluster of insulated tents and a central operations hub perched on the ice. Inside, the warmth was a welcome relief, though the air remained tense. Sophie immediately called a meeting, her tone clipped. "We need a full debrief," she began, pulling a map of the site onto the screen. "Amir, Tyler, start analyzing the data we collected. Alice, VJ, document everything you saw. Every detail matters. But let me be clear. No one goes near that chasm without my authorization." VJ raised an eyebrow. "So we're just going to ignore the biggest discovery in human history?" "No," Sophie replied, her voice cold. "But we're not charging in blind either. That projection wasn't a message of welcome. It was a warning." Alice spoke up, her tone measured. "Captain, I understand your caution, but if we delay too long, we risk losing access to the site. The ice is unstable, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be to uncover the truth." Sophie's expression hardened. "The truth won't matter if we're all dead." The warning deciphered. In the operations hub, Amir and Tyler worked side by side, analyzing the scans and footage from the city. The symbols on the walls matched patterns from the projection, and Amir was painstakingly translating them using a mix of linguistic algorithms and historical data. "These symbols aren't just decorative," Amir said, his brow furrowed. "They're part of a system, maybe a network." "Like a communication system?" Tyler asked, glancing at the glowing symbols on the screen. "Possibly," Amir replied, "but it's more than that. The symbols are layered, almost like code. They're warning us about something, but I haven't pieced it all together yet." Tyler leaned closer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "What if we cross-reference this with the projection? Maybe the hologram wasn't just a warning. It could have been a playback of events." Amir nodded slowly. "Do it. If we can reconstruct the timeline of what happened to them, it might give us some answers." A new threat. The storm came without warning. By nightfall, the winds howled like a living force, battering the tents and threatening to tear them apart. The temperature plummeted, and the team huddled inside, their equipment straining to maintain heat and power. Sophie's voice crackled over the comms. "Everyone stay put. We'll ride this out, but keep your gear ready. If we lose power, we move to the emergency shelter." Alice sat cross-legged in her tent, the glow of her tablet illuminating her face. She couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the projection's final image, the glowing symbol etched into the air. It felt familiar, but she couldn't place why. A sudden noise outside snapped her attention to the present, a low, mechanical hum that wasn't part of their equipment. She grabbed her jacket and stepped into the storm, shielding her face from the biting wind. "Who's out here?" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the gale. The hum grew louder, and through the snow she saw a faint blue light hovering near the chasm. Her heart raced. It was one of the drones, Tyler's, but it was moving erratically, as if drawn to something. "Tyler!" Alice shouted into her comm. "Your drone's gone rogue." Inside the operations hub, Tyler jolted awake, fumbling for his controls. "What? That's impossible! It's on standby!" "It's not anymore," Alice yelled. "It's heading toward the chasm." The collapse. The drone disappeared into the storm, and moments later, the ground beneath the camp shuddered violently. Alarms blared as the ice began to fracture. Sophie burst into the hub, her voice commanding. "Everyone out now! Emergency protocol! Head for the backup shelter!" The team scrambled, grabbing what they could, as the ground cracked beneath their feet. Alice was the last to leave, her gaze drawn to the chasm in the distance. The faint blue light of the drone was still visible, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Come on!" Sophie shouted, pulling Alice back. They reached the emergency shelter just as the main camp collapsed into the ice, swallowed by the shifting glacier. The storm raged on, but inside the shelter, the team sat in stunned silence, their breath visible in the freezing air. "What the hell just happened?" VJ asked, his voice shaking. Amir glanced at Alice, his expression grim. "The city isn't just buried, it's active, and whatever's down there, it doesn't want us here." Chapter 6: Whispers from the Ice. The emergency shelter was little more than a reinforced dome, its metal walls rattling under the fury of the Antarctic storm. Inside, the team huddled together, their breaths fogging the air. The collapse of their camp weighed heavily on everyone, but it was the glowing blue light of Tyler's rogue drone that lingered in their minds. Alice Hammond sat near the heater, staring blankly at her tablet. The faint signal from the drone still pinged on her screen, a blinking dot nestled deep within the chasm. It hadn't been destroyed in the collapse. Instead, it seemed to have found something. "What are you thinking, Hammond?" Captain Sophie Torrance's voice cut through the silence. She stood by the door, her silhouette sharp against the faint emergency lights. Alice glanced up. "That drone didn't malfunction, it was drawn to something. You think the city has some kind of magnetic pull?" Vijay Nair asked from across the room, his tone laced with skepticism. "Like a beacon?" Amir Khan frowned, running a hand through his graying hair. "If that's true, then it's not just a dead city. It's a system, a network, something still functional after thousands of years." Sophie's jaw tightened. Functional or not, it almost got us killed. Rebuilding all by morning, the storm had begun to wane, leaving the landscape eerily silent. The sun cast long shadows over the fractured ice, highlighting the devastation where their camp once stood. Equipment, tents, and supplies were buried beneath tons of ice. Alice stood with Sophie at the edge of the chasm, peering into the abyss. The city below glimmered faintly, as though alive with its own light. "We can't leave this behind," Alice said quietly. "Not now." Sophie sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "Our supplies are gone. Communications are down. We're days away from reinforcements, if they even know we're in trouble. Do you really think it's worth the risk?" Alice met Sophie's gaze. "Yes." For a moment, Sophie said nothing. Then she turned, her voice firm. "We're doing this my way. No one moves without a plan." The Descent. Part 2. With the limited gear salvaged from the shelter, the team prepared for another descent into the chasm. Tyler rigged a new harness system, double-checking every line and pulley. Amir carried a handheld scanner, its screen flickering with faint readings from the depths below. This time, the descent was quieter. No jokes, no banter, just the sound of their breathing and the occasional creak of the ropes. When they reached the city floor, the atmosphere felt heavier, charged with an energy they couldn't explain. The glow from the symbols on the walls seemed brighter, as though reacting to their presence. "What is this place?" Vijay murmured, running his fingers over the carvings. "It's like it's speaking to us." "The heart of the city." The team followed the signal from Tyler's drone, winding through the labyrinth of streets and bridges. The structures loomed above them, impossibly tall and intricate. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, their breaths coming in short bursts. Finally, they reached a massive plaza dominated by a towering obelisk. At its base, the drone hovered, its lights flickering erratically. Tyler approached it cautiously, his hands shaking. "It's not responding to my commands. It's like it's synced to something else." Alice stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the obelisk. Symbols ran up its length, glowing brighter the closer she got. She reached out a hand, hesitating. "Alice, don't," Sophie began, but it was too late. The moment Alice's fingers touched the surface, the symbols flared to life. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air filled with a low, resonant hum. A beam of light shot from the obelisk's tip, piercing the icy ceiling above and scattering into countless fragments. The team stumbled back as the light coalesced into a new projection. This time, the hologram was larger, more detailed. It showed a map of the Earth, with glowing lines radiating out from the city. "It's a network," Amir whispered. "This city was part of something global." The projection shifted, showing scenes of other cities, each more advanced than the last. Then came the destruction, waves of ice swallowing the landscapes, the glowing lines fading one by one until only the Antarctic city remained. The message. As the projection faded, a single symbol lingered in the air, glowing fiercely. It pulsed like a heartbeat, filling the chamber with a sense of urgency. "What does it mean?" Vijay asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amir scanned the symbol with his handheld device, his brow furrowing. "It's a warning. It says, something's coming, a recurrence." "Recurrence of what?" Sophie demanded. Alice's voice was hollow as she answered, "Whatever destroyed them." Chapter 7. The Recurrence. The air inside the plaza felt heavier, charged with an almost electric energy. The glowing symbol pulsed steadily in the center of the chamber, its light bathing the team in a cold, ethereal glow. Each pulse seemed to resonate through the ground, a heartbeat that demanded their attention. Alice Hammond couldn't take her eyes off it. The symbol wasn't just a warning, it was alive with intention, conveying a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. Her hand trembled as she tapped notes into her tablet, desperate to document every detail. "It's not just a message," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the low hum that filled the air. "It's a call to action." Deciphering the warning, back at the obelisk's base, Amir Khan worked furiously to decode the projection's final image. His scanner's display flickered as it struggled to process the data. "This doesn't make sense," Amir muttered, his brow furrowed. "The symbol, it's a combination of geological and temporal markers. It's mapping something, but the data's incomplete." "What do you mean, incomplete?" Sophie Torrance demanded, her arms crossed as she watched from a distance. "It's like trying to read a book with half the pages missing," Amir replied. "The symbol refers to a cyclical event, but without more context, I can't determine what triggers it or when." Tyler Reeve leaned over the scanner, his face pale. "You're saying we might be looking at a countdown?" Amir didn't answer, his silence heavy with implication. Unearthing the vault, Alice paced in front of the obelisk, her mind racing. If the city's builders had left a warning, they must have also left answers. She turned to Vijay Nair, who was examining the carvings on the surrounding structures. "Vijay, these symbols, are they all part of the same language?" she asked. He nodded, running his fingers over the intricate designs. "They're variations, but yes, it's like finding dialects of the same root language." "Then there has to be a central archive," Alice said. "Somewhere they stored all their knowledge." Sophie frowned. "You think there's a library hidden down here?" "Not a library," Alice replied. "A vault." The word hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Sophie looked at the others, her expression skeptical but resigned. "If we go looking for this vault, we do it carefully. No splitting up, no unnecessary risks." The descent into the vault. Following the faint hum of energy, the team ventured deeper into the city. The streets became narrower, the structures more intricate. Symbols glowed faintly on every surface, their patterns growing more complex as they approached what appeared to be the heart of the city. Finally, they reached a massive circular door embedded in the ice. The symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of the obelisk's light. "This is it," Alice whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. Tyler examined the door, his fingers tracing the grooves in the metal. "It's some kind of mechanism, but it's not powered." Amir stepped forward, holding his scanner. "The energy source must be nearby. Look for conduits or nodes that connect to the door." The team spread out, scanning the surrounding area. It was Alice who found it, a small pedestal hidden beneath a layer of frost. As she brushed the ice away, the symbols on its surface flared to life. "It's a key," she said, "or at least a trigger, awakening the past." When Alice placed her hand on the pedestal, the symbols rearranged themselves into a sequence, glowing brighter with each shift. The ground trembled as the circular door slowly rotated, its massive gears grinding against the ice. As the door opened, a wave of warm air rushed out, carrying with it a faint metallic scent. Inside the chamber was vast, its walls lined with crystalline structures that pulsed with light. At the center stood a massive console, its surface alive with shifting symbols. "This is it," Vijay said, his voice trembling with awe. "Their archive." The team moved cautiously into the chamber, their footsteps echoing on the smooth floor. Tyler approached the console, his hands shaking as he reached for the controls. "Careful," Sophie warned, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. "We don't know what activating this could do." "We don't have a choice," Alice said. "If we want answers, this is the only way." Tyler nodded and placed his hands on the console. The symbols reacted instantly, flooding the room with light. Holographic projections filled the air, showing scenes of the city's construction, its people, and the events that led to its downfall. The recurrence unveiled. The projections shifted, showing a timeline of Earth's geological history. The city's builders had mapped cycles of catastrophic climate events, floods, ice ages, volcanic winters that had repeatedly wiped out civilizations. Amir's face was pale as he pointed to the timeline. They predicted every major extinction event, and now they're warning about the next one. The final projection lingered on the glowing symbol, accompanied by a series of numbers. Alice stared at them, her mind working furiously. "It's a date," she said. "A countdown to the next event." Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "How much time do we have?" Alice looked at the sequence again, her stomach twisting into knots. If this is accurate, less than a decade. Chapter 8. Countdown. The chamber felt colder than the rest of the city, as though the weight of the holographic revelation had seeped into the very air. The glowing count symbol, etched in stark luminescence, hung in the center of the archive like a silent accusation. The team stared at the projection, the gravity of the timeline sinking in. The number glared back at them, relentless in its precision. 9 years. 9 years until whatever catastrophe the builders of this city had foreseen would come to pass. The team splinter's Sophie Torrance broke the silence, her voice a sharp blade cutting through the tension. "We're done here. Pack up, and let's get back to the surface." Alice Hammond rounded on her, incredulous. "We can't just leave. Do you understand what we've found? This isn't just about the past, it's about the future. It's about survival," Sophie snapped back. "If we don't get out of here, there won't be a future for us to worry about." Vijay Nair stepped between them, holding up his hands. "Hey, let's not tear each other apart, okay? We need to figure out what this countdown means, what triggers it, what we can do to stop it. And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Sophie demanded. "Stay down here and wait for the ice to bury us alive." "I don't think the ice is our biggest threat," Amir Khan interjected. His voice was calm, but the edge of fear was unmistakable. The city wasn't abandoned naturally. Something happened. And if this countdown is right, it's going to happen again. The warning grows. As the team debated, the symbols on the console began to shift. New patterns emerged, their light casting flickering shadows across the chamber. Tyler Reeve, who had been silent until now, moved closer, his hands hovering over the controls. "Something's changing," Hizaki murmured, his eyes fixed on the glowing symbols. It's responding to us." Alice stepped beside him, her breath catching as the projections morphed into a map. Lines of light radiated outward from Antarctica, converging on points around the globe. Each point pulsed with a faint glow, connected by thin, intricate threads. "This isn't just a warning," Alice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a map of the system they built, some kind of global network." "Why would they need a network?" Vijay asked, squinting at the map. What were they trying to control? Before Alice could answer, the chamber trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor. The glowing lines on the map grew brighter, and a new set of symbols appeared at the base of the console. Amir scanned them with his device, his brow furrowing. "These symbols, they're coordinates." "Coordinates to what?" Sophie asked. "To one of the other cities." Amir replied. "One of the ones in the projection." A dangerous proposition. The team reconvened outside the archive, the icy wind from the chasm cutting through their layers of gear. Sophie leaned against the jagged wall, her expression dark. "This is insane," she said, her voice flat. "We don't have the resources to chase coordinates across the globe. We barely made it here. And if we don't follow this lead," Alice shot back, "if this network holds the key to stopping the catastrophe, we can't afford to ignore it." Sophie glared at her, but before she could respond, Tyler spoke up. "She's right." Everyone turned to him in surprise. He shifted uncomfortably under their gazes, but pressed on. "Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but if there's a chance we can figure out what's coming and how to stop it, we have to try." "It's not that simple," Sophie said, her voice heavy with frustration. "We've already lost most of our equipment. We don't have the means to launch another expedition." "We don't need to," Amir interjected. "The data we've collected here, it's enough to start. If we can get back to base and send this to the right people, we can mobilize resources globally." Alice nodded. "But it has to start with us. If we don't act now, we'll lose the momentum we've gained." An ominous departure. As the team made their way back to the surface, the tremors beneath the ice grew stronger. The city's glow seemed to dim, as though it was retreating into the shadows. Tyler's drone, still hovering at the edge of the plaza, emitted a low, static-filled hum. "Something's happening," Tyler said, his voice tight. "The energy levels are spiking. Move," Sophie barked. "We're not waiting to see what it is." They climbed quickly, the cracks in the ice growing wider with every step. By the time they reached the surface, the chasm behind them had begun to collapse, sending plumes of snow and ice shooting into the air. Alice turned back, her heart sinking as the city disappeared beneath the ice. It's burying itself. It's protecting itself, Amir corrected. Whatever's down there, it wasn't meant to stay uncovered for long. Sophie waved them forward, her voice cutting through the roar of the collapsing chasm. Move it. We're not dying out here. A new mission. Back at the emergency shelter, the team gathered around the remaining equipment, their faces lit by the glow of their screens. The data from the archive had been downloaded, and Amir was working furiously to analyze the coordinates. This is it, he said, pointing to a location on the map. South America, somewhere deep in the Andes. That's where we go next, Alice said firmly. Sophie's eyes narrowed. We're not going anywhere until we regroup and get approval from the division. We don't have time for bureaucracy, Alice shot back. If we wait, we risk losing everything. The two women locked eyes, the tension between them crackling like the storm outside. Finally, Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine, she said. But if we do this, we do it my way. No heroics, no detours. Alice nodded, a flicker of relief passing over her face. Agreed. As the team began preparations for the next phase of their mission, the countdown loomed in the back of their minds. 9 years. The clock was ticking. Chapter 9. The race begins. The emergency shelter was bathed in the dim glow of computer screens, the hum of power generators barely audible beneath the roaring Antarctic winds. Inside, the team was locked in intense discussion, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them like the ice above. South America, Alice Hammond said, her finger hovering over the map displayed on Amir's screen. If these coordinates are right, there's another site hidden in the Andes. And if the network extends globally, then it's not just about uncovering history, Vijay Nair finished, his voice heavy with meaning. It's about survival. Captain Sophie Torrance leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. Let's say we get to the Andes and find another city. What then? We barely made it out of this one alive. We'll have more support, Alice replied, her tone resolute. Once we transmit this data, the scientific community and the world will have to take notice. And if they don't, Sophie pressed, if governments decide it's too risky or too expensive to act, then we'll go ourselves, Alice said, her voice unwavering. We can't wait for permission to save the future. The global reaction. The following morning, the team finally re-established communication with the Australian Antarctic Division. A shaky video link connected them to Dr. Rachel Calloway, the division's director, who listened intently as Alice presented their findings. This is unprecedented, Calloway said, her expression unreadable. If your data is accurate, it rewrites everything we know about human history and the planet's future. It's accurate, Amir said firmly, his voice cutting through the static. But we don't have time for academic debates. The countdown is real. We have less than a decade to figure out what triggers it. Calloway leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. The division will support a follow-up expedition, but something of this scale requires international coordination. We'll need to involve other nations, other agencies. Alice stiffened. We don't have time for bureaucracy. Every second we delay brings us closer to disaster. We'll do what we can, Calloway replied. But be prepared for resistance. Not everyone will see this as a priority. A fractured team. As the transmission ended, the room fell silent. Sophie turned to the group, her expression grim. You heard her. We might not get the help we need. That's why we go now, Alice said. If we wait for the world to wake up, it'll be too late. Do you ever stop to think about the risks? Sophie shot back. We've already lost equipment, resources, and nearly our lives. What makes you think the Andes will be any different? Because we don't have a choice, Alice snapped, her frustration boiling over. This isn't just about us, it's about everyone. Sophie glared at her, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Finally, she shook her head. Fine, but don't expect me to play hero if this goes sideways. The journey north. 3 weeks later, the team stood at the edge of a dense jungle in the foothills of the Andes, their breath misting in the cool mountain air. The journey had been grueling, a logistical nightmare made worse by limited funding and lukewarm support from international agencies. Welcome to the middle of nowhere, Tyler muttered, adjusting the straps of his overloaded pack. Vijay chuckled, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. I hope this middle of nowhere has better answers than the last one. Amir scanned the horizon, his handheld device blinking with readings. The coordinates lead into that valley, he said, pointing toward a narrow gorge shrouded in mist. If the site exists, it's buried deep. Then let's not waste time, Alice said, already moving forward. Entering the valley. The descent into the valley was treacherous. Thick vegetation tangled their path, and the ground beneath their feet was slick with moss and rain. The hum of insects filled the air, an unrelenting reminder of the life teeming around them. Amir paused to examine the readings on his device. The energy signatures are stronger here, he said, his voice tinged with awe. It's similar to what we saw in Antarctica. Which means we're getting close, Alice said, her eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Keep an eye out for anything unnatural, carvings, structures, anything. After hours of hiking, they came across a sheer rock face etched with faint, weathered symbols. The markings were similar to those in Antarctica, but adapted to the Andean landscape. Lines and curves wove together, forming a pattern that seemed to pulse with latent energy. This is it, Alice said, her voice trembling with excitement. The entrance. Unlocking the door. Tyler examined the symbols, his fingers tracing their grooves. It's another mechanism, he said, but it's not responding to touch. Maybe it needs a power source, Amir suggested, like the pedestal in Antarctica. Alice rummaged through her pack, retrieving a portable generator. If we can transfer enough energy into the system, it might activate. As Tyler connected the generator to the markings, the symbols began to glow faintly, their light spreading across the rock face. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew heavy with static. Then, with a low rumble, the rock face split apart, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. Vijay whistled. Well, that's inviting. Sophie stepped forward, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. We go in together. No one wanders off. Alice nodded, her pulse quickening as they stepped into the passage. The walls were lined with the same glowing symbols, their light growing brighter as the team ventured deeper. At the end of the corridor, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. Towers of crystal stretched toward the ceiling, casting refracted light across the space. In the center stood another obelisk, taller and more intricate than the one in Antarctica. Alice approached it slowly, her heart pounding. "We've found it," she whispered. Another piece of the puzzle. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Andian Vault. The underground chamber was unlike anything the team had encountered. Crystals the size of ancient trees spiraled toward the vaulted ceiling, their faceted surfaces catching the faint light emitted by the obelisk in the center. The air felt alive with energy, vibrating at the edge of perception. Dr. Alice Hammond moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing across the smooth stone floor. Her heart raced, not from fear but from the weight of discovery. This was the second city, another node in the mysterious network that spanned the globe. "This place is incredible," Vijay Nair murmured, his voice reverent. He ran his fingers along the base of one of the crystal spires, marveling at its cold, glass-like texture. "It's as if the architecture and nature are one." "Focus," Captain Sophie Torrance said sharply. Her flashlight swept across the chamber, revealing intricate carvings on the walls. "We don't know what's down here, or what could still be active." "Still active," Tyler Reeve echoed nervously. He crouched near a cluster of crystals, setting up a drone to capture footage. "Yeah, because that worked out so well last time." The second obelisk. The obelisk in the center of the chamber was larger and more complex than its Antarctic counterpart. Its surface was covered in thousands of tiny, interlocking symbols that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow. Amir Khan approached it cautiously, his scanner held out before him. The device beeped steadily, its screen displaying streams of data. "This structure is emitting the same energy signature as the first site, but it's stronger, more concentrated." Alice joined him, her eyes fixed on the glowing symbols. "It's like it's alive." "It's not alive," Amir corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's a machine, a highly advanced one, but still a machine." "Then let's see if we can turn it on," Alice said, her fingers brushing against the symbols. "Wait," Sophie began, but it was too late. The moment Alice touched the obelisk, the chamber came to life. The crystals surrounding them flared with light, their colors shifting in a dazzling display. A deep hum resonated through the floor, and the symbols on the obelisk began to rearrange themselves, forming patterns that spiraled upward like a digital cascade. The holographic archive. The light coalesced above the obelisk, forming a holographic projection that filled the chamber. The team stepped back, their faces illuminated by the swirling display. It was a map, this time, far more detailed than the one in Antarctica. Lines of energy radiated out from the Andian site, connecting to other points across the globe. Some lines pulsed brightly, while others were faint or completely dark. "This is it," Alice said, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is their network." Vijay pointed to one of the dim lines. "Those faint connections, does that mean those sites are inactive? Or damaged?" Amir speculated. "The system might have been disrupted when the first catastrophe hit." As they studied the map, a new projection emerged. It showed humanoid figures moving through the city, their bodies shimmering as if composed of light. They interacted with the crystals, activating panels and manipulating energy flows. "They weren't just using the network," Alice said, her eyes wide. "They were part of it. Their technology was integrated into their biology." The warning amplified. The projection shifted, showing a familiar image, the countdown. The glowing numbers loomed above them, accompanied by a stream of symbols that scrolled rapidly across the obelisk. Amir scanned the display, his brow furrowing as he tried to decipher the message. The countdown isn't just a warning, it's a sequence, like a program waiting to be executed. "What kind of program?" Sophie asked, her voice sharp. Amir hesitated. "It's hard to say, but if this network was designed to stabilize the planet, control climate, regulate tectonic activity, then it might be their fail-safe, a way to reset the system." "Or destroy it," Tyler muttered, his fingers tightening around the drone controller. A dark revelation. As the projection continued, it showed scenes of destruction, earthquakes ripping through cities, tsunamis swallowing coastlines, and volcanoes erupting in fiery fury. The images were accompanied by a single ominous symbol that pulsed like a heartbeat. Alice's breath hitched. "That symbol, it was in Antarctica. It's the trigger." Amir's scanner beeped urgently, and his face went pale. "The energy levels are spiking again. The network might be reacting to us." "Reacting how?" Sophie demanded. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor, and one of the crystal spires toppled, shattering into a cascade of glittering shards. "Move," Sophie shouted. "We're getting out of here now." The collapse. The team sprinted toward the passage they had entered, the chamber shaking around them. The once glowing crystals dimmed, their light flickering as if the city itself were struggling to stay awake. Alice glanced back, her heart sinking as the holographic map began to fade. "We're losing it." "Forget the map," Sophie barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. "We'll lose more than that if we don't get out." As they reached the passage, the obelisk emitted one final pulse of light. The team stumbled, covering their eyes as a blinding flash filled the chamber. When the light faded, the obelisk was dark, its surface inert. The chamber behind them collapsed with a deafening roar, sealing the Andian site once more. The message remains back on the surface. The team sat in stunned silence, the jagged mountains of the Andes rising around them. The data they had collected was still intact, but the loss of the site weighed heavily on their minds. "We have the coordinates," Alice said finally, her voice hoarse. "The map showed other sites. If we move quickly, we can." "No," Sophie interrupted. "We regroup, we reassess, and we figure out what we're up against before rushing headlong into another disaster." Alice wanted to argue but stopped herself. Sophie was right, they couldn't afford another mistake. But deep down, she knew they were running out of time. The countdown was still ticking. Chapter 11. Fragments of Truth. The temporary base the team had established near the Andian site was little more than a collection of tents and equipment hastily salvaged from their journey. The loss of the underground city and its invaluable obelisk weighed heavily on everyone, but the data they had managed to extract burned bright on their screens. Dr. Alice Hammond stared at the holographic map projected above the central table, her brow furrowed in concentration. The lines connecting the ancient network's nodes glimmered faintly, but many remained incomplete, broken by millennia of erosion or catastrophe. These energy conduits, she murmured, tracing one with her finger. They were part of a larger system, something global, but without the obelisk's full activation, we only have fragments. Amir Khan, seated across from her, adjusted his glasses and squinted at the scrolling data. The system was designed to respond to environmental imbalances, tectonic shifts, volcanic activity, even atmospheric changes. But this, he gestured to the countdown symbol. This isn't a natural cycle. It's like a fail-safe triggered by a catastrophic anomaly. Triggered by what? Vijay Nair asked, pacing behind them. What anomaly could force an entire civilization to abandon their cities and bury themselves in ice? Amir shook his head. We don't have enough information. Then we're wasting time, Alice said, her frustration spilling over. If we can't interpret the data, we need to find another site, another obelisk. Tensions rise. Captain Sophie Torrance entered the tent, her presence commanding as always. Before we start chasing another city, let's talk about logistics, she said, folding her arms. We've lost half our supplies, the rest of our equipment is barely functional, and our funding is running out. Are you suggesting we stop? Alice asked sharply, standing to face her. That we just give up? I'm suggesting we think, Sophie replied, her tone measured but firm. You're so focused on finding the next site, but we don't even know what we're looking for. We're looking for answers, Alice snapped, for a way to stop this countdown before it's too late. And running headfirst into the unknown is the best way to get all of us killed, Sophie shot back. We need a plan. Decoding the symbols. Later that night, the team gathered around a single laptop, its screen glowing in the dark. Amir had managed to isolate a series of repeating symbols embedded within the data. The symbols seemed to form a sequence, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. This isn't just language, Amir explained, pointing to the screen. It's code. Each symbol represents a specific action or function within the network. Like instructions? Tyler Reeve asked, leaning over the table. Exactly, Amir replied. But the syntax is alien. It's not linear like human languages. It's multidimensional. Alice leaned forward, her fingers tapping the edge of the table. Can you decode it? Not without more data, Amir admitted. We need the obelisk's activation sequence, what it was trying to do before the collapse. Then we're stuck, Vijay said, slumping into a chair. The obelisk is gone, and so is our chance to understand it. Not necessarily, Tyler said quietly. All eyes turned to him, and he shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. The drone. It recorded the obelisk right up until the collapse. I've been reviewing the footage. It might have captured the activation sequence. Why didn't you say something sooner? Sophie demanded. Tyler shrugged, his face red. I wasn't sure if it would be useful, but if Amir thinks the sequence is important. It's vital, Amir said, his eyes lighting up. Let's see it. A breakthrough. The footage from the drone played on the laptop, its shaky visuals showing the Andian obelisk as it came to life. The glowing symbols rearranged themselves in rapid succession, their patterns forming intricate spirals and geometric shapes. Amir paused the video, zooming in on a cluster of symbols that appeared just before the collapse. This is it, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. This is the sequence. Using the footage, he began piecing together the obelisk's activation code. The team watched in silence, the tension palpable as Amir worked. Hours passed, the only sound the clatter of keys and the occasional beep of the laptop. Finally, Amir leaned back, rubbing his temples. I think I've got it, he said, his voice hoarse. The sequence wasn't just activating the obelisk, it was sending a signal. Sending it where? Sophie asked. Amir pointed to the holographic map, to the other nodes in the network. The countdown isn't just a warning, it's a call to arms. The network is trying to reactivate itself. A dangerous decision. The revelation hit the team like a thunderclap. If the network was reactivating, it meant there was still hope, but it also meant that whatever triggered the countdown was imminent. We have to find the next site, Alice said, her determination renewed. If the network can stabilize the planet, we need to figure out how to make it work. And if it can't, Sophie asked, her voice heavy, if activating the network triggers something worse? Alice met her gaze, her expression resolute. Then we figure that out before it's too late. The room fell silent as the weight of their decision settled over them. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. But one thing was clear: the countdown wasn't waiting for them. Chapter 12: Shadows in the Jungle. The dense canopy of the Andian jungle swayed under the weight of a sudden downpour. Rain hammered against the tarp covering the team's base, creating a drumming rhythm that seemed almost ominous. The air inside the tent was heavy with tension as the team debated their next move. Alice Hammond sat at the edge of the table, her eyes darting between the holographic map and Amir Khan's screen. "We have the sequence," she said firmly. "Now we need to find the next site before it's too late." "Easier said than done," Tyler Reeve muttered, his hands busy repairing a damaged drone. "We're barely holding this operation together." "Maybe we won't have to," Sophie Torrance said suddenly, her voice sharp. She stood near the tent's entrance, peering into the rain-soaked jungle. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sidearm. "We might have company." Everyone froze. "What do you mean, company?" Vijay Nair asked, his voice tinged with alarm. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her binoculars and scanned the perimeter through a slit in the tarp. After a tense moment, she lowered them and turned to the group. "There's movement out there," she said, "and it's not local wildlife." The rival team. The team huddled closer, their voices hushed. Amir's fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up surveillance footage from their remaining drones. The grainy feed revealed shadows moving through the jungle, their shapes indistinct but unmistakably human. "Could be another research group," Tyler suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "Or it could be someone after the same thing we are," Sophie said. She paced the tent, her movements tight with tension. "We've sent data back to the division. If it leaked, other parties could be tracking us." Alice's stomach churned. The possibility of rival teams, or worse, corporate interests, competing for control of the ancient network wasn't new, but it was a reality they weren't prepared to face. "Do we know how many?" she asked. "Hard to say," Amir replied, squinting at the screen. "At least 6 figures in the footage, maybe more." Vijay ran a hand through his hair. "And we're supposed to outmaneuver them with what? A few drones and half a generator?" A dangerous encounter. The first confrontation came at dawn. The rain had eased into a misty drizzle, and the jungle buzzed with the sounds of waking wildlife. Sophie led a perimeter patrol with Alice and Tyler, their boots sinking into the wet earth as they moved cautiously through the underbrush. They spotted the intruders near the riverbank, 7 men in tactical gear, armed and speaking into radios. Their presence was a stark contrast to the team's unassuming scientific expedition. Alice's breath caught as she ducked behind a tree. "They're not researchers," she whispered. "No kidding," Sophie muttered, her hand hovering over her weapon. "Looks like private contractors. Probably hired muscle." Tyler swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "Watch and wait," Sophie said. "We don't engage unless we have to." The group stayed hidden, but as they observed, it became clear the contractors were scanning the area. One of them pulled out a device that emitted a faint blue light, sweeping it across the terrain. "They're looking for something," Alice said softly. "Or someone." A race against time. The team regrouped at the base, their faces pale as Sophie briefed the others on what they'd seen. "They're well-equipped and clearly organized," she said. "If they're here for the same reason we are, we can't afford to stay still." "But we can't leave," Alice argued. "The map points to another site. If we don't reach it first, they will." "And what do you suggest we do?" Sophie snapped. "March straight to them and hope they don't shoot us on sight?" "We outsmart them," Alice replied. "They're looking for the same energy signatures we are, right? If we can mask ours." "That's risky," Amir interrupted. "The equipment isn't designed for stealth. We'd have to jury-rig something, and even then, there's no guarantee it'll work." "It's better than nothing," Alice insisted. Reluctantly, Sophie nodded. "Fine. But if they catch wind of us, we abandon this position immediately." The chase under cover of night, the team dismantled their base, leaving only minimal traces behind. Tyler worked furiously to modify their equipment, using scraps from the damaged generator to create a makeshift signal dampener. By morning, they were on the move, following the map's faint trail deeper into the jungle. But the rival team was close. Drones buzzed overhead, their low hum a constant reminder of the danger stalking them. The jungle seemed to conspire against them, its tangled vines and uneven terrain slowing their progress. "Keep moving," Sophie urged, her voice low. "We're losing daylight." Alice glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding. She could feel the contractors closing in, their relentless pursuit a shadow over the team's every step. A desperate gambit. The breakthrough came when Tyler's dampener finally disrupted the contractors' drones, throwing their pursuers into disarray. The team used the distraction to gain ground, eventually reaching a narrow gorge where the map indicated the next node was located. But the victory was short-lived. As they descended into the gorge, the faint sound of boots crunching on gravel reached their ears. The contractors had regrouped and were closing in fast. "We don't have time for a fight," Sophie said, her voice tense. "Get to the site and secure it. I'll hold them off." "You're not staying behind," Alice said firmly. "I'm the only one who can buy you time," Sophie shot back. "Go." Alice hesitated, torn between logic and loyalty. Finally, she nodded. "Be careful." Sophie smirked. "Always am." As the team descended into the gorge, the sound of gunfire echoed behind them. Alice's heart ached with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving. The countdown was still ticking, and the world's future depended on them reaching the site before it was too late. Chapter 13. The Secrets Below. The gorge loomed before the team like a scar carved into the earth. Dense foliage clung to its edges, giving way to jagged stone that plunged into shadow. At the bottom, faint glimmers of light hinted at something unnatural, a pattern of glowing lines just visible through the mist. "This has to be it," Dr. Alice Hammond said, her voice a mix of awe and urgency. She tightened her grip on the climbing rope and glanced back at the others. "We're close." "Too close," Tyler Reeve muttered, adjusting his pack. The sound of distant gunfire echoed from the jungle above, reminding them of the contractors closing in. "We don't have time to debate," Alice snapped. "If we lose this chance, they'll beat us to whatever's down there." Amir Khan adjusted his scanner, its screen blinking with energy readings. "The network's stronger here. Whatever's at the bottom, it's active." "Then let's move," Vijay Nair said, already fastening his harness. "Before those mercenaries catch up." The descent. The climb into the gorge was treacherous. Loose rocks crumbled underfoot, and the damp air made the ropes slick in their hands. Alice's breath came in short bursts as she descended, her focus sharp, despite the weight of her pack. Halfway down, Tyler paused to adjust his footing, his voice echoing up the gorge. "Anyone else getting déjà vu? This feels a lot like the chasm in Antarctica." Alice glanced over at him, her brow furrowed. "It's not the same. This isn't just a buried city. It's something more intact. Look at the energy readings." The scanner on Amir's belt beeped rapidly as they neared the bottom. The faint light grew brighter, revealing intricate patterns etched into the walls of the gorge. The symbols glowed softly, their lines pulsing with an almost rhythmic cadence. "This is incredible," Amir whispered. "It's like the entire gorge is part of the network." The node. At the base of the gorge, the team found themselves standing before a massive stone structure. Its surface was carved with symbols similar to those seen in Antarctica and the Andes, but these were more detailed, layered in patterns that seemed to shift as they moved. The structure's centerpiece was a circular platform surrounded by crystalline spires. Each spire radiated faint light, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Amir's scanner beeped wildly as he approached the platform. This isn't just a node, it's a hub. The entire network could be controlled from here. Alice stepped onto the platform, her pulse quickening. Then this might be the key to stopping the countdown. Unlocking the hub, the team worked quickly, setting up equipment and analyzing the symbols etched into the platform. Tyler deployed a drone to capture high-resolution images of the carvings, while Amir deciphered the sequences glowing on the spires. "This is a control interface," Amir said, his voice tinged with excitement. "The symbols correspond to different functions: energy flow, environmental stabilization, communication." "Can you activate it?" Alice asked, her eyes locked on the platform. "Not yet," Amir admitted. "I need more time to decode the sequences." "We don't have time," Vijay said, glancing nervously at the edge of the gorge. "Those contractors could be on us any minute." "Then we improvise," Alice said, stepping forward. She placed her hand on the platform, the surface warm under her touch. The symbols flared to life, and the ground beneath them began to hum. "Alice, wait!" Amir shouted, but it was too late. A vision of the past. The hub reacted to Alice's touch, projecting a holographic display that filled the gorge with light. Images of the ancient civilization appeared, cities thriving with activity, their people integrated seamlessly with the network. The vision shifted, showing the catastrophic event that had triggered the countdown. Massive solar flares that disrupted the network, plunging the planet into chaos. "It wasn't just a natural disaster," Amir said, his voice trembling. "The flares overloaded the system. The network couldn't stabilize fast enough." The projection changed again, showing the countdown symbol surrounded by lines of energy. The lines pulsed erratically, as though the system were struggling to maintain balance. "The network is failing," Alice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's running out of time, just like we are." A new countdown. As the projection faded, the symbols on the platform began to rearrange themselves. A new sequence appeared, accompanied by a low, resonant hum. "What is it now?" Tyler asked, his voice edged with panic. "It's resetting," Amir said, his eyes wide. "This hub is connected to the countdown. Whatever we just triggered, it's accelerated the timeline." Alice's stomach dropped. "How much time do we have?" Amir stared at the new countdown, his expression grim. "Months, maybe less." Rising stakes. Before they could react, the sound of voices echoed down the gorge. The contractors had found them. Sophie Torrance's voice crackled over the comms. "They're on your 6. Get what you need and get out." Alice turned to Amir, her jaw set. "Can you download the data?" "I'll try," he said, plugging his scanner into the platform. "But I need a few minutes." "We don't have a few minutes," Vijay said, his hand tightening around the climbing rope. Alice looked at the glowing platform, her mind racing. The answers they needed were here, but so was the risk of losing everything. "Then we hold them off," she said, her voice steady, "whatever it takes." Chapter 14. Stand or Fall. The air in the gorge was charged with tension, the glow from the ancient platform casting shifting shadows on the jagged walls. Dr. Alice Hammond paced anxiously near the control interface, her eyes darting to Amir Khan, who was furiously typing on his scanner. "How much longer?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amir didn't look up. "I'm pulling as much data as I can, but this system is enormous. I need time." "Time is something we don't have," Captain Sophie Torrance said sharply. She stood at the edge of the gorge, her sidearm drawn as she scanned the approach for movement. "They'll be here any second." A crackle came over the comms. Tyler Reeve, perched higher up the gorge with a drone, sounded panicked. "They're coming, at least a dozen of them, armed to the teeth. They've got scanners, too. They know we're down here." Sophie turned to Alice. "If we're going to hold them off, we need a plan." Preparing for a fight. The team worked quickly, using whatever they could find to fortify their position. Tyler rigged 2 drones with modified cameras to emit bright, disorienting strobe lights. Vijay Nair gathered loose rocks to create a makeshift barricade, his hands trembling as he worked. "This isn't exactly my idea of an archaeological dig," Vijay muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "No one's idea of anything," Sophie said grimly. "But we make do. Stay low and stick together." Amir's fingers flew over his keyboard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "I'm almost done with the initial download, but the core data is taking longer. If I stop now, we'll lose critical information." "Then you keep working," Sophie said. "We'll buy you the time." First contact. The sound of boots on gravel echoed through the gorge, growing louder by the second. Alice crouched behind the barricade, her heart pounding. Beside her, Sophie adjusted her grip on her weapon, her eyes steely and focused. "Remember," Sophie said, her voice low, "we're not here to kill anyone. Disrupt, disarm, and delay. They're not walking away with this site." As the contractors came into view, Tyler activated the drones. The blinding strobes lit up the gorge, casting chaotic flashes of light that disoriented the approaching figures. Shouts of confusion echoed through the narrow space. "Now," Sophie barked. Alice and Vijay hurled rocks toward the contractors, forcing them to scatter and seek cover. Sophie fired a warning shot that ricocheted off a boulder, driving them further back. "Hold your positions," one of the contractors shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "They've got to be close." A desperate defense. The contractors regrouped quickly, advancing with military precision. One of them lobbed a flashbang toward the barricade, and Sophie tackled Alice to the ground just as it detonated. The explosion left them dazed, their ears ringing. "We can't keep this up," Vijay shouted, clutching his head. "We don't have a choice," Sophie snapped, pulling Alice to her feet. "Keep moving." Tyler's drones buzzed overhead, their strobe lights buying the team precious seconds as the contractors fired blindly into the gorge. One of the drones took a hit and spiraled to the ground in a shower of sparks. Amir's voice crackled over the comms. "I've got the first set of data, just a little longer for the core files." Turning the tide, Alice's mind raced as she scanned the platform for anything they could use. Her eyes fell on the glowing spires surrounding the control interface. An idea struck her, a risky, desperate idea. "What if we overload the spires?" she shouted to Amir. "Create an energy pulse to push them back." "That could fry the system," Amir protested. "We don't have another option." Alice shot back. "Can you do it or not?" Amir hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'll need to redirect the power flow. Cover me." Alice and Sophie moved to block the contractor's line of sight as Amir worked frantically at the console. Tyler, now armed with a makeshift slingshot, launched small rocks at the advancing group, his aim surprisingly accurate. "The pulse, almost there," Amir shouted as sparks flew from the console. The spires began to hum, their glow intensifying. The contractors, sensing something was wrong, rushed forward. One of them leveled a rifle at Amir, but Sophie fired a precise shot, grazing his arm and forcing him to drop the weapon. "Do it now!" Alice screamed. Amir hit the final command, and the spires erupted in a blinding flash of light. A wave of energy surged outward, throwing the contractors off their feet and sending a deep vibration through the ground. The team shielded their eyes as the pulse subsided. When they looked up, the contractors were retreating, their movements unsteady and disoriented. "We did it," Vijay whispered, his voice trembling with relief. Escaping the gorge, Sophie didn't waste a second. "Grab what you can and move. They'll regroup fast." Amir disconnected the scanner, clutching it tightly as he joined the others. The team scrambled up the gorge, their limbs aching but adrenaline propelling them forward. As they reached the surface, the distant sound of helicopters grew louder. Alice glanced back at the gorge, her chest tightening. The site was still active, its secrets partially uncovered, but the countdown was accelerating. "What now?" Tyler asked, his voice shaky. Alice turned to the team, her expression resolute. "We find the next site. And this time, we finish what we started." Chapter 15, Revelations in the Code. The safe house was quiet, tucked into the foothills of a remote Andian valley. It was a stark contrast to the chaos the team had left behind at the gorge. The hum of generators provided a steady backdrop as Dr. Amir Khan worked tirelessly at his laptop, his screen flooded with streams of decoded data. The room was dim, the only light coming from the monitor and the faint glow of a lantern in the corner. Alice Hammond sat beside him, her knee bouncing anxiously. "What have you found?" she asked, her voice taut with anticipation. Amir didn't look up. "The data is fragmented, but it's detailed. This isn't just a map of the network, it's a log of everything that's happened to it since its creation." "Everything?" Alice leaned closer, her heart racing. Amir nodded. "The solar flares, the collapses, the countdown, it's all here, and it gets worse." The warning decoded. The rest of the team gathered as Amir displayed the decoded files on the central screen. A holographic projection of the network appeared, its lines pulsing faintly. "This network wasn't just designed to stabilize the planet," Amir began. "It was meant to protect it." "Protect it from what?" Sophie Torrance asked, her arms crossed. "From us," Amir replied, his tone grim. "The builders of this network, whoever they were, foresaw a cycle of destruction. Each time a civilization grew too advanced, it triggered environmental and geological imbalances that the network had to correct." "So it's a reset button?" Tyler Reeve asked, his brow furrowed. "They built it to stop people from screwing up the planet?" "Not just to stop them," Amir said, "to erase them. Every major extinction event in Earth's history lines up with anomalies in this system's activity. The network doesn't just stabilize, it wipes the slate clean." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The countdown's purpose, Alice broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "The countdown, it's not a warning, It's a trigger. Amir nodded. When the countdown hits 0, the network will activate a global reset. The energy stored in these nodes will be released, causing massive tectonic shifts, supervolcano eruptions, and atmospheric collapses. The planet will survive, but we won't. That can't be right, Vijay Nair said, shaking his head. Why would they build something so destructive? Because they didn't trust us, Amir replied. The builders must have seen this cycle before. Civilizations rising, overreaching, and destroying themselves. They created this system to break the cycle. The dilemma. The weight of the revelation settled over the team like a shroud. Sophie was the first to speak, her tone sharp. If this system is designed to destroy us, we need to shut it down. And risk destabilizing the planet even more? Alice shot back. We don't know what happens if we interfere with the network. Do we know what happens if we don't? Sophie countered. We've got months, maybe weeks, before the countdown ends. We can't just sit on our hands. Amir interjected, his voice cautious. There's another possibility. If we can reactivate the network without triggering the reset, we might be able to use it to stabilize the planet without the collateral damage. That's a big if, Tyler said. What if you're wrong? Then we don't survive, Amir said simply. The global response. As the team debated their next move, a new transmission came through the Safe Houses satellite link. The Australian Antarctic Division had forwarded their data to international scientific and government organizations. The response was swift and divided. Some nations called for immediate action to dismantle the network, fearing its potential for destruction. Others argued for a cautious approach, insisting on more research before taking any steps. A video message from Dr. Rachel Calloway, the division's director, played on the screen. Her expression was grim. The world is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Whatever you decide, know that you're carrying the weight of humanity's future. We'll support you in any way we can, but the ultimate decision rests with your team. A divided team. The message only deepened the divide within the group. We need to act now, Sophie said. Find the next node and shut this thing down before it's too late. And risk destroying the one thing keeping the planet stable? Alice countered. If we rush this, could make everything worse. Vijay tried to mediate, his hands raised. There has to be a middle ground. Maybe Amir's right. Maybe we can control the network without triggering the reset. Or maybe we're playing with something we don't understand, Tyler said. Either way, it's a gamble. The tension in the room was palpable, each member grappling with the enormity of their choices. A fateful decision. As night fell, the team sat around a small table, the holographic map still glowing faintly above them. Alice looked at each of them in turn, her expression resolute. We need more information, she said. The next site on the map, if it's another hub, it could hold the answers we're missing. But we go carefully. No rash decisions. Sophie's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Agreed. But if it comes down to it, I'll do whatever it takes to stop this. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Amir said quietly. The countdown loomed in their minds as they prepared to move forward. The next site could hold salvation or seal their fate. Either way, time was running out. Chapter 16. The Path to the Unknown. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a faint glow across the Andian foothills. The team stood at the edge of the Safe Houses clearing, their packs strapped tightly to their backs. The next node on the map pointed to a remote desert in northern Africa, a barren expanse marked by shifting sands and hidden ruins. Dr. Alice Hammond adjusted her gear, her mind already racing ahead. The countdown was ticking faster now, each day slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. They couldn't afford delays. Is the plane ready? She asked, turning to Captain Sophie Torrance. It'll get us to the nearest outpost, Sophie replied, her tone clipped. From there, it's overland to the site. Good, Alice said, though the weight of their task pressed heavily on her shoulders. She glanced at Amir Khan, who was poring over the map one last time. You sure this is the next hub? It's the strongest signal we've got, Amir replied, his eyes scanning the glowing lines on the hologram. If the network's core is anywhere, this site could be a key connection. And if it's not, Vijay Nair asked, his voice laced with unease. Then we keep going, Alice said firmly. We don't stop until we have answers. Departure. The flight out of the Andes was uneventful, but tension simmered beneath the surface. The small cargo plane hummed softly as it cut through the clouds, its interior cramped with equipment and weary travelers. Tyler Reeves sat near the back, tinkering with one of the drones he'd salvaged from the gorge. "You think this site will be easier to access than the last one?" he asked, glancing at Alice. "I doubt it," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "If the builders of this network wanted these hubs hidden, they did a damn good job." Sophie, seated near the cockpit, chimed in, "And we're not the only ones looking anymore. Those contractors might have backup, and they're not going to give up easily." The reminder of their rivals hung in the air like a storm cloud. Every member of the team knew the risks, but the alternative, inaction, was far worse. Arrival in North Africa. The outpost was little more than a cluster of metal buildings baking under the relentless desert sun. The air shimmered with heat, and the dry wind carried fine grains of sand that seemed to get into everything. Alice shielded her eyes as she stepped off the plane, scanning the horizon. In the distance, jagged cliffs rose from the dunes, their shadows stretching like ancient sentinels. "That's where we're headed," Amir said, pointing to the cliffs. "The signal is strongest in that direction." "It's a 3-day trek," Sophie said, studying a map. "The terrain's rough and we'll need to ration our water." "Let's not waste time, then," Alice said. She adjusted her pack and began walking, the others falling into step behind her. The desert trek. The journey across the desert was grueling. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and the cold at night was a sharp contrast. The team moved in silence for the most part, conserving their energy and thoughts. Vijay broke the quiet one evening as they set up camp. "Do you think they ever imagined this?" he asked, gesturing to the stars overhead. "The people who built the network, do you think they knew someone would come looking for it thousands of years later?" "They didn't leave it buried for no reason," Amir said, stirring the embers of their fire. "Maybe they hoped no one would find it." "Then why leave maps at all?" Tyler asked, his voice muffled as he adjusted his sleeping bag. "Why not destroy it?" Alice stared into the flames, her thoughts drifting. "Because they didn't want to destroy hope. Maybe they believed someone could break the cycle." "Let's hope they were right," Sophie said, her voice low. Signs of the past. On the 3rd day, the team reached the cliffs. The jagged rocks rose sharply from the dunes, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand. As they climbed, the faint glow of the network symbols began to appear, etched into the stone. "We're close," Amir said, his excitement barely contained. "The readings are stronger than ever." The symbols led them to a narrow crevice in the rock, just wide enough to squeeze through. Tyler sent a drone ahead, its camera feed revealing a hidden passage that sloped downward into darkness. "This is it," Alice said, her heart pounding. "The next hub." The descent. The passage was tight and oppressive, the air growing cooler the deeper they went. The walls were covered in symbols that pulsed faintly, illuminating their path. It felt as though the network itself was alive, guiding them. Finally, they emerged into a cavern. At its center stood another obelisk, this one smaller but more intricate than the others they had seen. Around it were pedestals arranged in a circle, each glowing faintly with light. "This is different," Amir said, examining the configuration. "The energy flow here is concentrated. It's like a relay point." "A relay for what?" Sophie asked. Amir didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to the largest pedestal. "Let's find out." "Would you like the next chapter to focus on the activation of the hub and its revelations, or introduce immediate conflict with rival teams?" Chapter 17. The Heart of the Network. The cavern's silence was almost overwhelming, broken only by the faint hum emanating from the obelisk. It stood at the center of the space like a sentinel, its surface covered in intricate glowing symbols that shifted as though alive. Dr. Amir Khan approached the nearest pedestal cautiously, his scanner in hand. The device beeped steadily, its screen displaying streams of energy readings. "This hub is more advanced than the others we've seen," he said. "It's a focal point. Everything flows through here." Alice Hammond circled the obelisk, her eyes scanning the symbols. "If this is the relay point, might give us access to the entire network. We need to activate it." "Carefully," Sophie Torrance warned, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. "We've seen what happens when these things go wrong." preparing for activation. The team set up their equipment around the cavern, each member falling into a familiar rhythm. Tyler Reeve deployed drones to capture the layout of the hub, their lights casting eerie shadows across the walls. Vijay Nair worked with Alice to decipher the symbols, their whispered conversation filled with scientific jargon and speculation. "This sequence here," Alice said, pointing to a cluster of symbols on the obelisk. "It looks like it's designed to control energy flow." "And this one," Vijay added, tracing another line of symbols. "It's linked to environmental stabilization. It's like they were using the network to fine-tune the planet." "Let's hope we can figure out how to fine-tune it without breaking it," Tyler muttered. Amir knelt beside the largest pedestal, his fingers flying over his scanner. "I'm detecting a central control mechanism," he said. "If I can interface with it, I should be able to activate the hub." Sophie frowned. "And what happens when you do?" Amir met her gaze. "We find out if this network can save us, or if it's the reason we need saving." The activation. With the team in position, Amir began the activation sequence. The cavern filled with a low, resonant hum as the symbols on the pedestals flared to life, their light spreading in concentric circles toward the obelisk. The air grew heavy, charged with static. "This is it," Amir said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "The system is responding." The obelisk symbols began to shift, rearranging themselves into a complex pattern. A beam of light shot upward, illuminating the cavern's ceiling. Holographic projections filled the space, showing the network's sprawling web of nodes and energy flows. Alice's breath caught as the map expanded, revealing new sites and connections that hadn't appeared on previous scans. "It's a complete map," she whispered. "Every node, every connection, it's all here." "And it's active," Amir added. "The network is online." The revelation. As the projections shifted, a new sequence of symbols appeared. They pulsed with an urgency that sent a chill down Alice's spine. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to the display. Amir's face paled as he scanned the symbols. "It's the countdown," he said. "But it's different." "Different how?" Sophie demanded. "It's accelerating," Amir replied. "The activation of this hub has triggered a system-wide response. The network is recalibrating, but it's also speeding up the countdown." Alice's stomach twisted. "How much time do we have?" Amir hesitated, his gaze fixed on the display. "Weeks, maybe less." A desperate choice. The room fell silent as the weight of the revelation sank in. Sophie was the first to speak, her voice sharp. "Then we shut it down. If the network is causing the countdown, we need to stop it." "We can't," Alice said, her tone firm. "Not yet. If we deactivate the hub now, we'll lose the chance to understand how the network works and how to control it." "Control it?" Sophie shot back. "You've seen what this thing can do. You really think we can control something this powerful?" "We have to try," Alice insisted. "If we shut it down, we're dooming ourselves to ignorance. This might be the only chance we have to stop the reset and save the planet." Amir stepped between them, his hands raised. "Enough. We don't have time to argue. The system is stabilizing, but it's set, fragile. If we make the wrong move now, we could lose everything." The next step, as the team debated their options, the holographic map continued to evolve, revealing a single node that pulsed brighter than the others. It was located in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, far from any known landmass. Alice pointed to the glowing node. "That's the core," she said, "the central hub of the entire network." "If we can reach it," Amir said, his voice tinged with hope, "we might be able to reset the system or disable the countdown entirely." "And if we can't?" Sophie asked. Amir didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Chapter 18. Betrayal in the Sands. The oppressive heat of the North African desert clung to the team as they packed their equipment, the weight of the accelerated countdown pressing heavily on their minds. The decision to move toward the Atlantic hub was unanimous, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. "Double-check the gear," Captain Sophie Torrance ordered, her voice firm as she scanned the horizon. The cliffs surrounding the hidden hub offered a semblance of security, but the team knew better than to trust appearances. "We've got limited time, and we're already a target." Dr. Alice Hammond glanced at Sophie, her expression tense. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" "They're already here," Sophie replied grimly, nodding toward the dust clouds forming on the horizon. "And they're not hiding this time." The approach. Through the shimmering haze, a convoy of vehicles emerged, sleek, heavily armored, and unmistakably hostile. The contractors who had pursued them at the Andian site were back, and this time they had brought reinforcements. Tyler Reeves swore under his breath, his hands tightening around the controls of his drone. They've got enough firepower to take down a small army. What are they expecting from us? They're not expecting a fight, Sophie said, checking her sidearm. They're expecting us to surrender. Not happening, Alice said firmly. We've come too far to let them take this. Amir Khan adjusted the straps of his pack, his gaze flicking nervously to the approaching vehicles. If they know about the hub, they'll want control of it. If they get it, they won't, Sophie said, cutting him off. Not while I'm standing. The standoff. The convoy came to a halt at the base of the cliffs, and a figure stepped out of the lead vehicle. Dressed in tactical gear with a calm, authoritative demeanor, the man radiated control. His voice, amplified by a speaker, echoed across the desert. Dr. Hammond, Captain Torrance! There's no need for violence, he called. We're here to negotiate. Negotiate my ass, Sophie muttered, raising her binoculars. That's Elias Cross. Alice's stomach dropped. Cross was a known figure in corporate and military circles, an expert in acquiring valuable assets by any means necessary. If he was here, the stakes had just escalated. What do? Tyler whispered, his hands hovering over the drone controls. We listen, Sophie said reluctantly, but we don't give an inch. Cross's proposal. Cross stepped forward, his arms outstretched in a show of mock diplomacy. We all want the same thing, don't we? He said, his voice smooth. The knowledge, the power, this network could change everything, but it's not safe in your hands. Alice stepped into view, her fists clenched. And it's safer with you? You'd sell it to the highest bidder. Not quite, Cross said, his smile thin. I represent interests that understand the importance of balance. With the right oversight, this technology could be used to stabilize economies, prevent wars, even reverse climate change. At what cost? Alice shot back. How many lives are you willing to gamble? Cross's expression hardened. The real question is how many lives you're willing to risk by keeping this knowledge out of the right hands. You don't have the resources to control this network, let alone the expertise. Sophie stepped forward, her weapon lowered but ready. You've made your pitch. Now leave. Cross's smile returned, colder this time. I don't think so. Ambush. Without warning, a shot rang out, shattering the tension. Sophie ducked, dragging Alice to the ground as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. The contractors had opened fire, their assault rifles cutting through the desert silence. Get to cover, Sophie shouted, returning fire as the team scrambled for safety. Tyler launched his drone, its camera feed displaying the contractors' positions. They're flanking us on the left, he yelled, guiding the drone to drop a smoke canister. Amir and Vijay crouched behind a boulder, clutching their packs. We can't hold them off forever, Vijay shouted over the gunfire. We don't have to, Alice said, her mind racing. We just need to slow them down long enough to destroy the hub. Sophie's head snapped toward her. Destroy it? Are you insane? If they get control of it, they'll accelerate the countdown, or worse. Alice said, it's the only way. A desperate plan. As the firefight raged, Alice and Amir worked quickly to overload the hub. The glowing symbols on the obelisk pulsed erratically as Amir rerouted the energy flow, his hands shaking. This will cause a chain reaction, Amir warned. It'll take out the hub and everything within 100 meters. Do it, Alice said, her voice steady. We'll find another way to stop the countdown. Sophie shouted into her comms. We've got 3 minutes. Everyone fall back to the extraction point. The escape. The team retreated under the cover of smoke and drone interference. Sophie and Tyler provided suppressing fire as the contractors scrambled to regroup. The obelisk's glow intensified, casting eerie shadows across the desert. Cross's voice echoed through the chaos, furious. Stop them! Don't let them leave! The ground beneath the hub began to tremble as the energy buildup reached critical levels. Alice looked back one last time, her heart heavy. They were losing a vital piece of the network, but it was better than letting it fall into the wrong hands. With seconds to spare, the team reached the extraction point. The hub detonated behind them in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave shaking the ground and sending a plume of sand into the air. Aftermath. As the dust settled, the team sat in stunned silence inside their getaway vehicle. The loss of the hub was a devastating blow, but the knowledge they had gained and the data they still carried gave them a sliver of hope. "We'll find the next node," Alice said quietly, her voice firm. "And this time we'll be ready." Sophie nodded, her jaw set. "Let's hope the world is ready for what's coming." The countdown continued, relentless and unforgiving. The next step would be their most dangerous yet. Chapter 19. The Contractor's Gambit. Elias Cross stood at the edge of the scorched desert where the obelisk had once stood, his jaw clenched as he surveyed the devastation. The shockwave from the hub's detonation had created a crater, scattering debris and throwing his operation into disarray. Behind him, his second-in-command, Serena Voss, approached cautiously, her tactical gear dusted with sand. "We've confirmed the obelisk is gone," she reported, her tone clipped. "No trace of the network remains." Cross turned slowly, his expression cold. "Dr. Hammond and her team did this?" "Who else?" Serena replied. "They're the only ones who've been able to interact with the network successfully." Cross's fist tightened. "Then they're more valuable than I thought. If we can't take the network, we'll take them." Regrouping. The contractors retreated to their mobile base, a series of armored vehicles outfitted with advanced surveillance and communication equipment. The mood in the camp was tense, the loss of the hub a glaring failure. Serena stood over a holographic map, her fingers tapping rapidly as she updated their intelligence. "Satellite scans show movement to the south," she said, pointing to a faint trail. "It's Hammond's team. They're heading toward the coast." Cross leaned over the map, his mind racing. "They're making for the Atlantic hub. If they reach it, they'll have direct access to the network's core." "We can intercept them," Serena suggested. "Cut them off before they get there." "No," Cross said, his voice measured. "We've underestimated them once. I won't make that mistake again. We'll let them do the hard work, then we'll take it from them." Assembling the team, Cross called his contractors to a briefing, their faces grim as they gathered around the central command table. "This is no longer about securing assets," he began, his voice firm. "This is about control. Hammond's team has the knowledge to activate the network and the resolve to keep it out of our hands. That makes them a threat." One of the contractors, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Kane, spoke up. "With respect, sir, we've lost the element of surprise. They'll see us coming." "Which is why we won't rely on brute force," Cross replied. "We'll divide our resources. Half will continue to shadow their movements. The other half will infiltrate key locations along their route, cutting off their supply lines and sowing confusion." Serena nodded, her sharp eyes narrowing. "And when they're vulnerable, we strike." A spy in the shadows. As the contractors planned their next move, Cross revealed another card up his sleeve, a mole embedded in one of the research organizations supporting Hammond's expedition. "Dr. Hammond's data was transmitted to the Australian Antarctic Division," he said, pulling up a secure channel. "Our contact inside their network has access to the files. We'll use that information to anticipate their next move." Serena raised an eyebrow. "Do we trust this source?" "As much as I trust anyone," Cross replied. "But for now, they're useful." The mole's information painted a clearer picture of the team's trajectory and the likely location of the Atlantic hub. Armed with this intelligence, Cross set his plan into motion. Setting the trap, the contractors deployed in two groups. The first group, led by Serena, would track Hammond's team covertly, using drones and remote sensors to monitor their movements. The second group, under Cross's direct command, would establish control over key logistical points, airstrips, ports, and supply caches. "We'll cut off their escape routes," Cross explained to his team. "By the time they reach the hub, they'll have no options left." "And if they try to activate it?" Marcus asked. Cross's expression darkened. "Then we take them down, by any means necessary." A calculated risk. As night fell over the desert, the contractors moved with precision, their vehicles kicking up plumes of dust as they spread out across the region. Drones buzzed overhead, their infrared cameras scanning for signs of the team. In the command vehicle, Serena monitored the feeds, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "We've got a visual," she said, pulling up an image of Hammond's group setting up camp near a rocky outcrop. Cross studied the image, his eyes narrowing. "They're moving faster than expected. Increase surveillance, but keep your distance. I want them to feel safe. And if they don't stop, Serena asked. They will, Cross said, his voice confident. They have no idea we're this far ahead. Chapter 20, The Ambush. The sun burned low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Dr. Alice Hammond and her team trudged across the cracked earth, their boots crunching against the dry, lifeless soil. The faint outline of the Atlantic stretched on the horizon, a promise of hope just out of reach. Almost there, Captain Sophie Torrance said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. We'll set up camp once we reach that ridge. Tyler Reeve adjusted the drone strapped to his pack, his eyes scanning the horizon. Feels too quiet out here, he muttered. It's the desert, Vijay Nair replied, his voice strained. It's always quiet. Not this quiet, Tyler countered, his unease growing. The contractor's strike. As the team approached the ridge, a faint hum broke the silence. It started low, almost imperceptible, but quickly grew louder. Sophie's instincts kicked in immediately. Down, she barked, diving behind a boulder as a barrage of bullets tore through the air. Alice hit the ground hard, her heart pounding as sand sprayed around her. She glanced up to see drones descending from the sky, their sleek forms bristling with weaponry. It's them, she shouted, crawling toward the nearest cover. From the ridge, Elias Cross watched the chaos unfold with cold precision. He raised a hand, signaling his contractors to advance. Flush them out, he ordered. I want them alive. Fighting back, Sophie returned fire, her shots precise but calculated. Tyler, get those drones offline, she yelled over the cacophony. I'm trying, Tyler shouted, his fingers flying over the drone controller. He deployed one of their own drones, its defensive countermeasures lighting up the sky. A brilliant flash disoriented the attacking machines, giving the team a brief reprieve. Amir, status? Alice called, clutching her tablet as she ducked behind cover. Not good, Amir replied. They've got us surrounded. We need a way out. Vijay added, panic creeping into his voice. A desperate plan. Alice scanned the ridge, her mind racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned down. But then she saw it, a narrow canyon cutting through the rocks to their left. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to regroup. Sophie, Alice shouted. The canyon! It's our only shot! Sophie followed her gaze, nodding grimly. All right, but we'll need a distraction. I've got it, Tyler said, deploying his last drone. He programmed it to dive toward the contractor's position, its payload of smoke canisters creating a thick, impenetrable cloud. Go, Sophie yelled, covering the team as they made a break for the canyon. Into the canyon, the team sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. The smoke gave them just enough cover to reach the canyon's entrance, its jagged walls offering a semblance of protection. Keep moving, Sophie urged, her voice echoing off the narrow walls. As they ran, Alice glanced back to see the contractors regrouping. Cross stood at the edge of the ridge, his expression calm but determined. Even through the chaos, his eyes locked onto hers. They're not going to stop, Alice said breathlessly as they reached a small clearing deep within the canyon. They'll have to catch us first, Sophie replied, reloading her weapon. Regrouping. The team collapsed onto the ground, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Amir clutched his scanner, his face pale. They're tracking us, he said. The drones, they've marked our position. Then we keep moving, Sophie said. We'll use the terrain to lose them. But for how long? Vijay asked, his voice trembling. They're relentless. Alice met his gaze, her determination unwavering, long enough to reach the hub. This isn't over. The faint hum of drones echoed in the distance, a reminder of the relentless pursuit. The contractors were closing in, but the team had one advantage. They knew what was at stake, and they wouldn't stop fighting for it. Chapter 21. Preparing for the final push. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the narrow canyon. The team huddled together in a small alcove carved into the rock, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of Amir Khan's tablet. The hum of distant drones served as a constant reminder that their pursuers were relentless. We can't keep running like this, Captain Sophie Torrance said, her voice low but resolute. If we don't make a stand soon, they'll pick us off one by one. We need to reach the Atlantic hub, Alice Hammond countered, her gaze fixed on the holographic map hovering above Amir's device. It's the only way to stop the countdown and them. They're tracking us with drones, Tyler Reeve pointed out. If we don't find a way to jam their signals, they'll catch us before we even get close. Fortifying the plan, Amir's fingers flew across his tablet as he analyzed the signal patterns from the contractor's drones. They're using a centralized control system, he said. If we can disrupt it, even briefly, it might buy us enough time to escape. Disrupt it how? Vijay Nair asked, leaning over Amir's shoulder. With an EMP, Tyler suggested, but we don't have the equipment for that. We don't need a full EMP, Amir said, just enough to overload their receivers. I can modify one of the drones to emit a localized burst. It's risky, Sophie said. If it doesn't work, we'll have wasted time and resources. It'll work, Amir said with quiet confidence, but I'll need about an hour to rig it. Scavenging supplies. While Amir and Tyler worked on the drone, Sophie led Alice and Vijay on a quick scouting mission. The canyon walls provided some cover, but the terrain was harsh and unforgiving. Every step felt like a gamble. Keep an eye out for anything we can use, Sophie said, scanning the area with her binoculars. Tools, metal, even scrap electronics. Alice spotted a rusted satellite dish half buried in the sand. What about that? She asked, pointing to it. Sophie nodded. Good, let's take it back. As they worked to free the dish from the ground, Vijay hesitated. Do you think we'll even make it to the hub? He asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Alice paused, meeting his gaze. We have to, she said simply. There's no other option. Reinforcements. Back at the alcove, Amir and Tyler were putting the finishing touches on the modified drone. Its rotors whirred softly as Tyler adjusted the output settings, his brow furrowed in concentration. This should give us a 5-minute window, Tyler explained, enough to jam their signals and throw them off our trail. And after that? Sophie asked, as she and the others returned with the scavenged supplies. After that, we run, Amir said. Fast. Rallying the team. As night fell, the team gathered around a small fire, their faces illuminated by its flickering light. The reality of their situation hung heavily in the air, but Alice refused to let despair take hold. We've come too far to give up now, she said, her voice steady. The Atlantic hub is the key to stopping this. If we can activate it, we might still have a chance to save everything. And if it's another trap? Sophie asked. Then we adapt, Alice replied, like we always do. The team exchanged glances, their resolve hardening. They had survived countless dangers to get this far. Another hurdle wouldn't break them now. Chapter 22. The Edge of Salvation. The roar of the waves echoed through the narrow canyon as the team emerged onto a windswept plateau. Below them, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, its churning waters reflecting the stormy sky. The air was thick with salt and anticipation. Dr. Alice Hammond shielded her eyes against the glare of the setting sun, her gaze locked on the faint outline of the hub in the distance. Perched atop a jagged outcrop, the structure glimmered faintly with the same pulsing light they had seen in the other nodes. That's it, she whispered. The core hub. Captain Sophie Torrance moved to her side, scanning the horizon with her binoculars. No sign of Cross's team yet, she said, but they're not far behind. We can't waste time, Alice said. If we're going to stop the countdown, we have to act now. The hub revealed. The team descended toward the outcrop, the terrain shifting from rugged rock to smooth stone as they approached the hub. The structure was larger than they had anticipated, a vast circular platform surrounded by crystalline towers that pulsed with light. It's beautiful, Vijay Nair said, his voice filled with awe and terrifying. Focus, Sophie said, her tone sharp. Tyler, deploy the drones. I want eyes on every approach. Tyler nodded, releasing 2 drones that buzzed upward, their cameras scanning the surrounding area. If Cross is coming, we'll see him. Amir Khan stepped onto the platform, his scanner already capturing data. This is incredible, he said, his fingers flying across the controls. The energy levels here are off the charts. This isn't just a hub, it's the heart of the entire network. Alice joined him, her gaze fixed on the central console. Can you activate it? I think so, Amir replied. But it's not just a switch. It's a system, layered, complex. If we're not careful, we could destabilize the whole thing. We don't have a choice, Alice said. The countdown's accelerating. This is our last chance. The activation process. As Amir began the activation sequence, the platform came to life. The crystalline towers flared brightly, casting beams of light into the stormy sky. The ground beneath them hummed with energy, and the air seemed to vibrate with an almost tangible force. "Whatever you're doing, make it quick," Sophie said, her hand resting on her weapon. "We've got movement on the eastern ridge." Tyler checked his drone feed, his face pale. "It's them, Cross and his team. They're closing in fast." "Can we hold them off?" Vijay asked, his voice shaking. "We have to," Sophie said. "Amir, how long do you need?" 10 minutes, Amir replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "Maybe less." "You've got 5, Sophie said. "Make it count." A fateful decision. As the contractors advanced, Sophie and Tyler took defensive positions near the edge of the platform. Alice stayed close to Amir, her heart pounding as the symbols on the console shifted rapidly. "What's happening?" she asked. "The system's responding," Amir said, his voice tense. "It's mapping the network, reconnecting the nodes, but something's wrong." "What do you mean, wrong?" Alice demanded. "There's interference," Amir said. "The countdown, something's amplifying it. If I can't isolate the source, we might trigger the reset." Alice's stomach clenched. "Then shut it down." "I can't," Amir said. "Once the sequence starts, it has to finish. Either we stabilize the system or we don't," Alice finished, her voice hollow. Chapter 23. The Final Confrontation. The roar of the wind and the hum of the network filled the air as the crystalline towers around the hub pulsed with energy. The distant sound of boots crunching against the rocky ground grew louder. Elias Cross and his team were closing in. Captain Sophie Torrance crouched behind a low barricade at the edge of the platform, her rifle trained on the eastern ridge. Beside her, Tyler Reeve monitored the drone feeds, his face pale but determined. "They're flanking us," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "We hold the line," Sophie said firmly. "Amir, how much longer?" 5 minutes, Amir Khan called back, his fingers flying over the console. "Maybe less if I can stabilize the sequence." "You've got 3, Sophie snapped. "Alice, stay close to him." Alice Hammond stood beside Amir, her eyes locked on the holographic map flickering above the console. The network's nodes pulsed erratically, their patterns mirroring the countdown. "It's now or never," she muttered under her breath. Cross makes his move. Elias Cross emerged from the shadows, flanked by his contractors. His calm, authoritative demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. He raised a hand, signaling his team to halt. "Hammond!" Cross's voice boomed across the platform. "It doesn't have to end this way. Step away from the console, and we can work together." "Like hell we will," Sophie muttered, her finger tightening on the trigger. Alice stepped forward, her voice cutting through the wind. "You don't want to stop the countdown, Cross. You want to control it. We're not giving you that chance." Cross's smile was cold. "Control is the only thing that will save us. Your team is outmatched, outgunned. Don't throw away your lives for a futile gesture." The first shots, before Cross could say more, Sophie fired a warning shot, the bullet ricocheting off the rock near his feet. "That's your only warning," she called. "Step back, or we'll make you." Cross's smile faded. "So be it." He raised his hand, and his contractors surged forward, their weapons blazing. Sophie and Tyler returned fire, the sharp cracks of gunfire echoing across the platform. Alice ducked behind the console as bullets whizzed overhead. "Amir, we need that sequence now," she shouted. "I'm almost there," Amir yelled, his voice tight with concentration. The symbols on the console shifted faster, the network's energy surging. A desperate defense, Sophie and Tyler held their ground, but the contractors were relentless, advancing with military precision. Smoke grenades exploded around the platform, obscuring their vision and forcing them to reposition. "Tyler, take the left," Sophie barked, reloading her rifle. "I'll cover the right," Tyler nodded, deploying a drone equipped with a blinding strobe light. The contractors faltered as the light cut through the smoke, giving the team a brief advantage. Vijay Nair huddled behind a boulder, his breathing ragged. "This isn't a battle, it's a massacre." "Not if we win," Sophie shot back, firing another round. Cross's gambit. Amid the chaos, Cross advanced toward the console, his movements deliberate. He dodged past the gunfire with a practiced ease, his eyes locked on Alice and Amir. Alice saw him coming and stepped into his path, her fists clenched. "Stay back, Cross," she warned. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "And you do?" Cross countered, his voice calm. "This network is bigger than you, Hammond, bigger than all of us. You can't stop it, but I can." Alice shook her head. You're not saving the world. You're dooming it. Cross's expression hardened. Then so be it. The turning point. As Cross lunged toward the console, Sophie fired a shot that grazed his arm, forcing him to retreat. He snarled, clutching the wound, but his determination didn't waver. At the console, Amir let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it. The sequence is locked in." The platform shuddered as the crystalline towers flared with light, their energy converging into a single, blinding beam that shot skyward. The network's nodes on the holographic map began to stabilize, their erratic pulses smoothing into a steady rhythm. "We did it," Alice whispered, her heart pounding. The aftermath. The contractors faltered as the network's energy surged, forcing them to retreat. Cross stared at the console, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing away. "You can't stop what's coming." As Cross and his team disappeared into the shadows, the platform fell silent, the hum of the network fading into the background. The countdown on the holographic map slowed, its numbers stabilizing. Alice turned to Sophie, her voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We bought ourselves time, but it's not over yet." "No," Sophie agreed, holstering her weapon. "It's just beginning." Chapter 24. Charting the Unknown. The aftermath of the confrontation left the team drained but resolute. The platform hummed softly, its crystalline towers now pulsing with a stable, rhythmic glow. The countdown on the holographic map had slowed, buying humanity precious time, but the fight was far from over. Dr. Alice Hammond sat cross-legged near the console, her tablet balanced on her lap. The holographic map flickered above her, revealing new data that had emerged during the stabilization process. "This is it," she murmured, her fingers scrolling through the patterns. "The map is fully unlocked. We can see everything now, every node, every connection." Captain Sophie Torrance leaned against a boulder, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "And what do we do with that information?" she asked. "The contractors might be gone, but they'll regroup. They always do." "We go to the core," Alice said, pointing to a glowing node in the center of the map. "The stabilization bought us time, but the network isn't fully functional yet. If we want to stop the countdown for good, we need to reach the core hub." Planning the journey. Amir Khan joined Alice, his scanner in hand. "The core hub is in the Atlantic, submerged if these readings are accurate. We'll need specialized equipment to even reach it." "And funding," Vijay Nair added, his tone grim. "Do you have any idea how much an undersea expedition costs?" Alice glanced at Captain Sophie. "We still have allies in the division. If we send them the data, they'll have to back us." Sophie frowned. "It's a risk. Once this information goes out, it won't just be Cross's team coming after us. Every government and corporation on the planet will want a piece of this." "Then we control the narrative," Alice said. "We make sure they understand the stakes." "And if they don't care about the stakes?" Tyler Reeve asked, tinkering with a damaged drone. "What if they just see this as another resource to exploit?" "Then we'll deal with that when it comes," Alice said firmly. "Right now, the network is all that matters." A divided world. The team spent the next several hours uploading the stabilized data to their secure network. The response from the global community was swift and divided. Dr. Rachel Calloway from the Australian Antarctic Division responded first, her face appearing on the team's satellite uplink. "This is unprecedented," she said, her tone a mix of awe and concern. "The data you've sent, it's already causing ripples. Governments are mobilizing, and there's talk of joint operations to secure the remaining hubs." "Good," Alice said. "We'll need all the help we can get." "But not everyone sees it that way," Calloway warned. "Some nations are skeptical, and others, well, they're already sending teams of their own. The contractors you mentioned might just be the beginning." A fractured alliance. As Calloway's transmission ended, the team sat in tense silence. The weight of their discovery and its implications hung heavy over them. "We can't trust anyone," Sophie said finally. "Not fully. If this becomes a global free-for-all, we'll lose any chance of stabilizing the network." "So what do we do?" Vijay asked. "We stay ahead of them," Alice said. "The core hub is the key. If we reach it first, we can control the system and the narrative." "And if we fail?" Tyler asked. Alice didn't answer. The question lingered, unspoken but unavoidable. "Preparing for the core." Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of their journey. Sophie coordinated their limited resources, ensuring they had the equipment and supplies needed for an undersea expedition. Tyler repaired their remaining drones, equipping them with enhanced sensors and defensive capabilities. Amir spent long hours analyzing the stabilized data, searching for clues about the core hub's functionality. "This isn't just a control center," he said one evening, his voice tinged with awe. "It's the foundation of the entire network. Everything flows through it." "And if it fails?" Alice asked. Amir hesitated. "Then the countdown restarts, and this time we won't be able to stop it." A glimmer of hope. As the team prepared to leave, Alice took a moment to herself, standing on the edge of the cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the water in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. The network was stabilizing. The countdown had slowed, and while the path ahead was fraught with danger, they had a chance, a slim, fragile chance, to save the world. "Ready?" Sophie's voice broke through her thoughts. Alice turned, nodding. "Ready." The team set off, their resolve unshaken. The core hub awaited, and with it, the answers to the network's mysteries and the fate of humanity itself. Chapter 25, The Global Race. News of the network's stabilization spread like wildfire. Within days, every major government and corporate entity with a vested interest in technological or environmental dominance began mobilizing their resources. What had been a shadowy competition to locate and control the hubs erupted into a full-scale geopolitical race. Dr. Rachel Calloway's voice came through the team's comm system, her tone tense. "Satellite intelligence confirms multiple expeditions are en route to the Atlantic hub. The US, China, Russia, and a coalition of European nations have all launched operations. Private entities are joining the fray, too." Alice Hammond listened, her fists clenched. "We expected this, but not this quickly." "Expect it to get worse," Calloway said. "Elias Cross is working with one of the more aggressive factions. He's been spotted coordinating their efforts." "That's a problem," Captain Sophie Torrance said. "If Cross is leading them, they'll stop at nothing." Escalation at sea. On the Atlantic, the race to the core hub was a logistical and tactical nightmare. Naval fleets patrolled contested waters, their presence a deterrent to unauthorized incursions. High-tech submersibles, funded by nations and corporations alike, were deployed to search the seabed. The team monitored these developments from their temporary base, a converted freighter anchored in international waters. Tyler Reeve studied satellite feeds, his brow furrowed. "We've got at least 6 vessels converging on the hub's coordinates. Some are military, some private. Let them fight each other," Sophie said, her voice cold. "The more distracted they are, the better chance we have." Allies and betrayals. Dr. Calloway sent word that a coalition of neutral nations was willing to back the team's mission. "They understand what's at stake," she said. "But they're also under immense pressure to take control of the network." "How much can we trust them?" Alice asked. "Not much," Calloway admitted. "But they're the closest thing you've got to allies right now." The coalition provided limited resources, an experimental submersible and a small escort vessel, but also issued a warning. Other factions might not hesitate to sabotage the team's mission. Betrayals were likely. The contractor's shadow Cross and his contractors remained a constant threat. Through intercepted communications, the team learned he had struck a deal with a major private defense contractor, granting him access to advanced military-grade technology. "They've got stealth drones and automated underwater vehicles," Tyler reported. "They'll find the hub before anyone else if we don't move fast." Alice's determination hardened. "Then we don't just move fast, we move smart." A dangerous gamble. The team formulated a risky plan. Using the coalition's submersible, they would navigate undetected through the heavily monitored waters. Tyler and Sophie would deploy drones to create false signals, drawing attention away from their true location. "This is a long shot," Vijay said, his voice tinged with doubt. "It's all we've got," Sophie replied. "If we fail, it's not just us who lose." Alice stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "We're not failing. Not now." Chapter 26, Showdown at Sea. The tension aboard the team's freighter was palpable. The faint hum of the ocean was punctuated by the constant ping of sonar and the beeping of radar systems. In the distance, storm clouds churned, their dark shapes reflecting the growing conflict beneath the waves. Captain Sophie Torrance stood on the bridge, her sharp eyes scanning the monitors. "They're here," she said, her voice grim. "Cross's ship is just over the horizon." Tyler Reeves swiveled his chair to face the team, his fingers hovering over the drone controls. "We've got two vessels heading our way. One is definitely Cross, the other looks military." Alice Hammond's stomach tightened. "Military? Which nation?" "Can't tell," Tyler said, "but they're armed and they're not here to negotiate." The first move. The freighter's communications array crackled as a transmission came through. Cross's smooth, confident voice filled the room. "Dr. Hammond, Captain Torrance, let's skip the pleasantries, shall we? Surrender now, and I'll ensure your team gets off this ship alive." Sophie leaned over the console, her tone icy. "Not a chance. You're outnumbered and outgunned," Cross continued. "This isn't a fight you can win." Alice stepped forward, gripping the edge of the console. "We're not here to win a fight, Cross. We're here to save the world, something you don't seem to care about." Cross's laugh was cold. "Saving the world? Is that what you think you're doing? This network is power, Hammond, and in the right hands, it could shape the future." "In your hands, it'll destroy it," Alice shot back. The transmission cut off abruptly, and Sophie turned to Tyler. "Get those drones in the air. We're not waiting for them to fire the first shot." The battle begins. The first missile streaked across the sky, its trail a fiery blur against the stormy backdrop. Sophie barked orders, and the freighter's defenses roared to life. Tyler's drones launched into the air, their onboard systems scrambling to intercept the incoming threat. "Missile neutralized," Tyler shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "But they're sending more." "Keep them busy," Sophie ordered. "We need to buy Amir time to get the submersible ready." Amir Khan worked frantically below deck, his tools scattered across the cramped workspace. "This sub isn't built for combat," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "If we take a direct hit, we're done." A bold maneuver. Alice joined Amir, her presence steadying him. "What do you need?" she asked. "Time," Amir replied, "and for them to stop shooting at us." "We're working on that," Alice said, glancing toward the hatch. "But we need to get this sub in the water. If we can reach the hub, we can shut this down." Above deck, Sophie and Tyler fought to keep the freighter afloat. The military vessel had joined the fray, its cannons unleashing a relentless barrage. Tyler's drones danced through the chaos, their countermeasures blinding the enemy long enough for the freighter to maneuver. "They're getting closer," Tyler shouted. "We can't keep this up." The turning point. As the storm intensified, Sophie made a desperate decision. "We're not going to win this fight," she said. "But if we draw them into the storm, we might be able to lose them." "Into the storm?" Tyler repeated, his eyes wide. "That's suicide." "It's our best shot," Sophie said, "and it's better than letting Cross get his hands on that hub." Alice returned to the bridge, her expression grim. "Amir's almost ready. We just need to hold them off a little longer." "Then let's give him all the time he needs," Sophie said, steering the freighter toward the heart of the storm. A narrow escape. The storm engulfed the ships, its howling winds and towering waves turning the battle into chaos. Cross's ship struggled to maintain its position, its targeting systems disrupted by the weather. The military vessel veered off course, its crew focusing on survival rather than pursuit. Under the cover of the storm, the freighter launched the submersible. Amir, Alice, and Tyler climbed aboard, their faces pale but determined. "You're sure this thing will hold?" Tyler asked as the sub began its descent. "No," Amir admitted, "but it's all we've got." Sophie remained on the freighter, her voice steady over the comms. "I'll keep them busy as long as I can. Go find that hub and end this." As the sub disappeared into the depths, the freighter vanished into the storm, its fate uncertain. Chapter 27. Descent into the Abyss. The submersible's cabin was bathed in a soft blue light, its consoles humming softly as it descended into the dark waters of the Atlantic. The faint glow of the crystalline network beneath them illuminated the depths like a ghostly web, guiding their way to the core hub. Dr. Alice Hammond leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on the viewport. "This is it," she murmured. "The network's heartbeat." Amir Khan adjusted the sub's controls, his expression tense. "We're nearing the coordinates. The energy readings are off the charts." "Off the charts, how?" Tyler Reeve asked from his position at the rear of the cabin, nervously tapping his fingers against the metal wall. Strong enough to fry this sub, if we're not careful, Amir replied. Comforting, Tyler muttered, glancing out the viewport. The inky blackness seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the faint, rhythmic pulses of light emanating from the seabed. The network's core and pain. As the submersible descended further, the glowing lights grew brighter, their patterns forming intricate, interconnected circuits. At the center of the web, the core hub emerged, a massive, spherical structure suspended in the water like a celestial body. Its surface was covered in symbols that shifted and glowed, casting eerie reflections across the ocean floor. That's it, Alice said, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. The core. It's alive, Tyler whispered. It's alive. Amir's scanner beeped rapidly, the readings spiking. The energy levels here are beyond anything we've encountered. Whatever this hub is doing, it's the nexus of the entire network. The approach. The submersible glided closer to the core, its lights illuminating the symbols etched into its surface. Alice studied them intently, her mind racing. These symbols, they're the same ones we saw at the other hubs, but they're more complex. It's like a master code. A code for what? Tyler asked. For everything, Alice replied. The countdown, the stabilization, the reset, it's all controlled from here. Amir nodded, his hands steady on the controls. If we can interface with the core, we might be able to override the countdown completely. And if we can't, Tyler asked, his voice tight, then we hope Sophie's buying us enough time to figure it out, Amir said. The interface. As they reached the core, the submersible docked with a small port at its base. A hatch opened, leading to a narrow passageway that glowed faintly with the same pulsing light. The team exited the sub, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Inside the core, the walls pulsed with light, the symbols shifting in hypnotic patterns. At the center of the chamber stood a console similar to the ones they had encountered before, but this one was far more intricate, its surface alive with energy. Alice approached it cautiously, her hand hovering above the controls. This is it, she said, the key to everything. Amir stepped beside her, his scanner in hand. The system is already active. If we make the wrong move, we could destabilize the entire network. Then we don't make the wrong move, Alice said, her voice firm. Let's get to work. The core's secrets. As Amir began interfacing with the console, holographic projections filled the chamber, displaying a vast, interconnected web of nodes and energy flows. The countdown loomed at the center, its numbers ticking down with relentless precision. Alice studied the projections, her mind racing. The countdown isn't just a timer, it's a failsafe. If we can't stabilize the network, it triggers the reset. And how do we stabilize it? Tyler asked. Amir's hands moved rapidly over the controls, his expression focused. The core is designed to balance the planet's systems, tectonic, atmospheric, even biological. But the network is fractured. If we can reconnect the damaged nodes, it might be enough to stop the countdown. Might? Tyler repeated, his voice rising. That's not exactly reassuring. It's the best we've got, Alice said, and it's better than doing nothing. Chapter 28. Balancing the Network. The core's chamber pulsed with energy, its shifting lights casting eerie reflections on the team's faces. Dr. Amir Khan worked feverishly at the console, his fingers flying across the glowing controls. Each keystroke sent ripples of light through the symbols on the walls, like drops of water in a vast, interconnected pool. We've got major disruptions in the network, Amir said, his voice taut with concentration. Some nodes are completely offline, and others are unstable. Alice Hammond leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the holographic projections. The map of the network displayed pulsing lines and flickering nodes, the damaged areas glowing a menacing red. We need to stabilize the system before we reconnect the nodes, Alice said. If we force them online while they're unstable, we'll overload the core. Tyler Reeve hovered nearby, clutching his tablet like a lifeline. And if we don't reconnect them in time, the countdown ends and we're toast. Exactly, Alice said. No pressure. Diagnosing the damage, Amir isolated one of the unstable nodes, its red glow pulsing erratically. This one is critical, he said. It's a tectonic regulator in the Pacific. If it fails, the entire region could destabilize. Can you repair it remotely? Alice asked. Not completely, Amir replied, but I can reroute some of its functions to nearby nodes. It'll be a temporary fix, but it might buy us enough time. Alice nodded. Do it. As Amir worked, the chamber vibrated slightly, a low hum reverberating through the floor. Tyler glanced around nervously. Is it supposed to do that? It's the core recalibrating, Amir said. The system's trying to compensate for the damage. Reconnecting the nodes, with the first node stabilized, the team turned their attention to the others. Each one represented a critical function of the network: climate regulation, oceanic currents, atmospheric stabilization. The work was slow and meticulous, every adjustment requiring careful calculation. This one's a mess, Vijay Nair said, pointing to a node in the Arctic. The energy flow is all over the place. We'll have to isolate it, Alice said. If it feeds back into the core while it's unstable, it could trigger a cascade failure. Amir's brow furrowed as he typed furiously. Isolating now? Got it, but it's draining power from the surrounding nodes. We'll need to balance the load. Can't we just patch it? Tyler asked. Not unless you want to see half the Arctic melt overnight, Amir replied. The system fights back. As the team worked, the core's lights flickered, and the chamber trembled violently. Alice steadied herself against the console, her heart pounding. What's happening? The network's rejecting the repairs, Amir said, his voice rising with urgency. It's interpreting the changes as a threat. Can you override it? Sophie Torrance asked, her voice sharp. I'm trying, Amir said, but the core's automated defenses are kicking in. The projections shifted, displaying a series of warnings in an ancient script. Alice stared at them, her mind racing. It's not just automated, she said. The network was designed to protect itself. If it thinks we're tampering, it'll shut us out, or worse. A desperate strategy. Amir's hands shook as he entered a new sequence into the console. If we can convince the core that we're part of the system, it might let us finish the repairs. And how do we do that? Tyler asked. Alice stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the symbols. The builders integrated themselves into the network, right? Their biology, their technology, it was all connected. If we can mimic their patterns, we might be able to trick the core. That's a big if, Sophie said. And if you're wrong, Alice met her gaze, then we've already lost. We're synchronizing with the core. Using the data they had gathered from the other hubs, Alice and Amir worked together to create a pattern that mimicked the builders' signatures. The process was painstaking, each adjustment requiring precision and coordination. This is it, Amir said finally, his voice hoarse. If this works, the core should recognize us as part of the system. And if it doesn't? Tyler asked. Let's not think about that, Alice said, placing her hand on the console. The symbols flared brightly, their light enveloping her. The chamber fell silent as the core processed the input. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the damaged nodes began to stabilize, their red glow fading into a steady blue. Hope restored. The holographic map updated, displaying a fully connected network. The countdown at the center slowed further, its relentless march toward zero reduced to a steady, manageable pace. We did it, Amir said, his voice filled with relief. The network's stabilizing. Alice exhaled, her shoulders sagging. We're not done yet, but we've bought ourselves time. And now we use it wisely, Sophie said, her tone resolute. Cross and his allies won't stop. We need to secure this network for good. Chapter 29. Securing the Network. The core chamber had settled into a steady hum, its crystalline towers glowing with a calm, rhythmic pulse. The network's stabilization was a monumental success, but the sense of relief was fleeting. The team knew their work was far from over. Dr. Alice Hammond stood before the console, her fingers tracing the holographic map. The nodes were no longer flickering red, but the system's vulnerability remained. Stabilizing the network bought us time, she said. But it's not enough. If Cross or anyone else gains control, they could undo everything. Captain Sophie Torrance, standing at the chamber's entrance with her weapon slung over her shoulder, nodded. Then we make sure they can't. Locking down the core. Amir Khan worked tirelessly at the console, his scanner linked to the core's systems. The network has a defensive subroutine, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. But it hasn't been active in thousands of years. Can you bring it online? Alice asked. Maybe, Amir replied. But it's risky. If the system misinterprets our intentions, it could shut down entirely, or worse, activate the failsafe. We don't have a choice, Sophie said. If Cross gets his hands on this, it's game over. With a deep breath, Amir initiated the sequence. The chamber trembled as the defensive subroutine came to life. The projections shifted, displaying layers of intricate code and ancient symbols. It's working, Amir said, his voice tinged with awe. The core is reinforcing its defenses, but we need to finish the job. A digital barrier. Tyler Reeves stepped forward, his tablet in hand. We can create an additional layer of protection, he suggested. A digital barrier tied to biometric signatures. Only someone with access to our data could override it. Do it, Sophie said, and make it airtight. No backdoors, no overrides. Tyler nodded, his fingers flying over the tablet. It'll take some time, but I can encrypt the network with a key linked to all of us. If anyone tries to break in, the system will lock them out. A new threat. As the team worked, the core's sensors picked up a new disturbance. The holographic map displayed a series of incoming signals, multiple vessels converging on their location. Cross, Sophie muttered. He's not giving up. And he's not alone, Alice added, her eyes scanning the display. It's not just his team. We've got military ships and private contractors closing in. We need more time, Amir said, his voice tight. Then we give you time, Sophie replied, turning to Tyler. Deploy the drones. Create a distraction. Tyler hesitated. If we lose the drones, we won't have any eyes on the surface. We'll manage, Sophie said. Right now, the network is all that matters. Securing the legacy. As the drones launched, Tyler activated their countermeasures, filling the water above the core with interference. The incoming vessels faltered, their sonar and targeting systems scrambled. Amir finished the defensive sequence, his hands trembling as he entered the final command. The system is locked down, he said. The network is protected for now. Alice exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. We did it. Not yet, Sophie said, her voice grim. We've held them off, but they'll regroup, and next time they'll come with everything they've got, a new mission. With the network secured, the team gathered near the submersible. The core glowed softly behind them, a testament to their success and a reminder of the challenges ahead. We need to take this fight to them, Alice said. If we let Cross and his allies dictate the terms, we'll lose. Sophie nodded. Agreed, but we can't do it alone. It's time to rally what's left of the world's governments and make them see the bigger picture. And if they don't? Tyler asked. Then we keep fighting, Sophie said, until we can't. The team boarded the submersible, their resolve unshaken. The battle for the network and humanity's future was far from over. Chapter 30. Building a Global Alliance. The team's submersible emerged from the depths, its exterior glistening with salt water and faint traces of the network's energy signature. The converted freighter, still anchored in international waters, stood as a fragile sanctuary amidst the growing storm of global interest. Captain Sophie Torrance scanned the horizon from the freighter's deck, her face lined with exhaustion. We've got limited time before the next wave of pursuers shows up, she said. If we're going to form a coalition, we need to act fast. Dr. Alice Hammond nodded, her tablet already in hand. The data we've secured from the core is compelling, but it won't be enough. We need to convince world leaders that this isn't about power, it's about survival. Amir Khan, seated at a makeshift workstation, pulled up a detailed report on the network's stabilization. The countdown is still ticking, albeit slower. If we don't maintain global cooperation, the system could destabilize again. Reaching out. The first step in forming a coalition was reaching out to the scientific and political communities that had shown interest in the network. Dr. Rachel Calloway of the Australian Antarctic Division acted as their primary contact, facilitating connections with key players. In a secure video conference, Calloway appeared on screen, her expression a mix of urgency and determination. I've already contacted representatives from several nations, Australia, Canada, Germany, and Japan. They're interested, but they're also cautious. Cautious is good, Sophie said. It means they're thinking, but we need action. Calloway sighed. It's not just governments we're dealing with. Private corporations are lobbying hard to gain access to the network. They're framing it as a technological arms race. Alice leaned forward. Then we need to change the narrative. This isn't a race, it's a lifeline. The countdown doesn't care about borders or profits. The first assembly. A week later, the team participated in a virtual summit with representatives from over 20 nations and organizations. The meeting, held under strict security protocols, was a delicate balancing act between transparency and protecting the network. Alice presented the stabilized map of the network, highlighting its potential to reverse environmental damage, stabilize tectonic activity, and regulate climate patterns. This isn't just a technological marvel, she said. It's a tool for planetary survival. The response was mixed. Some leaders saw the potential for cooperation, while others remained skeptical, fearing the network's power could be weaponized. An ambassador from China spoke up, his tone measured. If we agree to cooperate, who controls the network? How do we ensure it isn't used to dominate weaker nations? Sophie stepped in. Control isn't the goal, preservation is. The network wasn't designed to serve one group, it was designed to maintain balance. If we fight over it, we'll destroy it and ourselves. Gaining allies. Despite the challenges, the team found unexpected allies. Smaller nations, often overlooked in global power dynamics, saw the network as an opportunity to level the playing field. Environmental organizations, tech innovators, and grassroots movements joined the call, amplifying the message. A representative from Iceland, a nation heavily invested in sustainable energy, expressed their support. This network represents hope for a future where humanity lives in harmony with the planet. We're ready to contribute. Sabotage and setbacks. As momentum built, so did resistance. Cross and his allies worked behind the scenes to sow discord, spreading misinformation about the network's potential dangers. Claims of impending disasters and accusations of conspiracy created fractures in the fledgling coalition. One night, the freighter's communications array was hacked, and false messages were broadcast to allied nations, warning of a supposed catastrophic malfunction at the core hub. The team scrambled to regain control, their progress threatened by the very forces they sought to counter. Amir worked furiously to trace the breach, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's Cross," he said through gritted teeth. "He's trying to discredit us." "Then we push back," Alice said. "We double down on the truth." A unified purpose. In a decisive move, the team organized a live demonstration of the network's capabilities, using the stabilized nodes to redirect a brewing hurricane away from a densely populated coastline. The operation, broadcast worldwide, silenced many skeptics and solidified the coalition's resolve. "This is what we can achieve when we work together," Alice said in a press statement. "The network isn't a weapon, it's a chance to heal our planet." Preparing for the next step. With the coalition gaining strength, the team prepared for their next mission, securing the remaining unstable nodes and ensuring the network's long-term stability. Sophie addressed the group aboard the freighter, her voice steady and commanding. "We've made progress, but the fight isn't over. Cross and others like him will keep coming, but as long as we stand united, we can protect the network and the future it promises." The team's resolve was stronger than ever, their mission clear. The countdown was no longer an inevitability, it was a challenge they were determined to overcome. Chapter 31. Securing the Unstable Nodes. The freighter's engine rumbled softly as the team prepared for their next mission. The global coalition had identified 3 critical nodes that remained unstable. One buried deep within the Siberian tundra, another hidden in the Amazon rainforest, and a third located beneath the icy waters of the Southern Ocean. Dr. Alice Hammond studied the holographic map aboard the ship's briefing room, her gaze fixed on the flickering red nodes. "These 3 are crucial to the network's stability," she said. "If we don't secure them, the countdown could accelerate again." "And if we lose even one," Captain Sophie Torrance asked, her arms crossed. "Then the network collapses," Alice replied grimly. Dividing the team. Given the nodes' locations, the team made the difficult decision to split into smaller groups. Alice, Tyler Reeve, and a small coalition team would tackle the node in Siberia, where extreme cold and logistical challenges awaited. Sophie and Amir Khan would head to the Amazon, tasked with navigating dense jungle terrain and unknown threats. Meanwhile, Vijay Nair would join a multinational team in the Southern Ocean to stabilize the underwater node. "Splitting up is risky," Sophie said during their final briefing, "but it's the only way to cover this much ground." "Then we make it work," Alice said. "We've come too far to fail now." Siberian Front. the frozen node. The harsh winds of Siberia bit through every layer of clothing as Alice and her team descended from a helicopter into a remote snow-covered valley. The node, hidden beneath an ancient glacier, pulsed faintly beneath layers of ice. "This is insane," Tyler muttered, his breath visible in the freezing air. "How are we supposed to dig through all that?" "We won't have to," Alice replied, holding up her scanner. "The energy signature is strong enough to melt the ice if we direct it properly." As the team set up their equipment, the ground trembled slightly. Alice's scanner beeped in alarm. "We've got seismic activity," she said. "The node's instability is triggering localized quakes." "Then let's stabilize it before the whole glacier comes down," Tyler said, already positioning the equipment. Amazon mission, the Green Inferno. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, Sophie and Amir navigated through dense foliage, their every step shadowed by the sound of unseen wildlife. The node was located within a hidden cavern, its energy disrupting the surrounding ecosystem. "This place is alive," Amir said, swatting at a cloud of insects, "and it's fighting back." As they neared the cavern, they encountered massive roots that had grown unnaturally fast, twisting toward the node's energy source. "It's like the network's feeding the jungle," Sophie observed, her machete slicing through the dense vegetation. Inside the cavern, the node glowed brightly, its energy causing the air to hum. "This is incredible," Amir said, his scanner capturing the data. "But it's also dangerous. If the energy surge continues, it could trigger a chain reaction that destroys the forest." "Then we stop it," Sophie said, her voice resolute. Southern Ocean, beneath the waves. Far south, Vijay Nair's team braved the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean aboard a specialized submersible. The underwater node, located near a geothermal vent, was emitting unstable energy that threatened to disrupt oceanic currents. As the submersible approached the node, Vijay marveled at its beauty. "It's like a living crystal," he said, watching the light dance across its surface. "Don't get distracted," one of his crewmates warned. "We've got a thermal spike near the vent. If it erupts, we're done." Working carefully, Vijay and the team deployed stabilizers around the node, redirecting its energy flow away from the geothermal vent. "Just a little more," Vijay muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing temperatures. Synchronizing the network. Back aboard the freighter, the team's efforts converged. The three nodes began to stabilize, their energy signatures aligning with the core. The holographic map displayed a web of glowing blue lines, a testament to their success. "We did it," Alice said, her voice filled with relief. "The network's stabilizing." "But for how long?" Sophie asked. "As long as we keep working together," Alice replied. "The network isn't just a system. It's a reminder that we're stronger when we're connected." Chapter 32. Strengthening the Alliance. The holographic map aboard the freighter displayed a network of stabilized nodes glowing with renewed strength. The once chaotic countdown had slowed significantly, but the fragile peace was threatened by the rising tide of global tensions. Dr. Alice Hammond leaned against the central console, her eyes scanning the latest reports. "We've bought the world time," she said. "But time isn't enough. We need a united front to protect the network and to prevent it from being exploited." Captain Sophie Torrance stood nearby, her arms crossed. "The coalition is holding, but barely. Cross's faction is sowing distrust, and some nations are starting to question our intentions." Alice turned to Sophie, determination etched into her features. "Then we need to remind them why we're doing this. A call to action." The team initiated a series of high-level communications with coalition leaders and global influencers. Using the data from the stabilized nodes, they presented a compelling case for unity. "We're not just stabilizing a system," Alice said during a virtual summit with world leaders. "We're stabilizing our planet. This network isn't a weapon. It's a chance to undo centuries of damage, to ensure a future for all of us." Her words resonated with some, but others remained skeptical. Representatives from nations with vested interests in technology and energy monopolies questioned the network's potential for misuse. "How do we ensure this doesn't become another tool for the powerful to exploit the weak?" asked a delegate from a developing nation. Alice responded firmly. "By ensuring transparency and equal access, the network belongs to no one and to everyone." Allies stepped forward. The team's message began to gain traction. particularly among smaller nations and independent organizations. Grassroots movements rallied behind the call for cooperation, amplifying the team's message across social media and international platforms. Rachel Calloway of the Australian Antarctic Division became a key ally, working tirelessly to mediate disputes and build bridges between opposing factions. "The network is the great equalizer," she said during a public address. "It's a testament to what humanity can achieve when we work together." The threat within. Despite their progress, the coalition faced internal threats. Cross's operatives had infiltrated several key organizations, spreading disinformation and stoking fears of a global conspiracy. One evening, Amir Khan discovered a breach in the coalition's communications network. "They're planting false reports," he said, his hands flying over the keyboard. "If this spreads, it could fracture the alliance." "We need to counter this," Sophie said. "Expose the lies before they take root." Tyler Reeve worked with Amir to trace the source of the disinformation and launch a coordinated response. Using the network's stabilized nodes, they broadcast a live feed showing the system's real-time energy flows and environmental impacts. The broadcast silenced many critics, showcasing the network's potential to combat climate change, stabilize ecosystems, and prevent natural disasters. A symbol of hope. As the coalition solidified, the team proposed a symbolic act to demonstrate their unity: the construction of an international research facility near the Atlantic hub. The facility would serve as a center for monitoring the network and fostering global collaboration. The proposal was met with widespread support, and within weeks, construction began. Nations that had been at odds found common ground in their shared investment in the network's future. "This isn't just a facility," Alice said during the groundbreaking ceremony. "It's a beacon, a reminder that when we put aside our differences, we can achieve the extraordinary." Preparing for the final push. With the coalition strengthened and the network stabilized, the team turned their attention to the final phase of their mission: ensuring the network's long-term protection and addressing the remaining risks posed by Cross and his allies. "We've come a long way," Alice said during a team meeting aboard the freighter. "But this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rewrite our future." The team's resolve was unshaken. They had forged alliances, faced down adversaries, and uncovered the secrets of an ancient civilization. Now they were ready to defend the legacy they had uncovered and the hope it represented. Chapter 33: The Final Stand. The skies over the Atlantic churned with storm clouds as the freighter approached the international facility under construction. Tension gripped the team. The coalition had done its part, securing the network and rallying global support, but one threat remained: Elias Cross. "He's not going to let this go," Captain Sophie Torrance said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship's engines. "If Cross gets near the network, he'll dismantle everything we've built." Dr. Alice Hammond nodded, her face resolute. "We need to end this, once and for all." Amir Khan's fingers flew over his laptop, monitoring the network's energy flows. "The system is stable, but it's vulnerable. If Cross's team interferes, they could overload the core. Then we make sure they don't get the chance," Sophie said. The ambush. The warning came just as the freighter neared the facility. Tyler Reeve, monitoring the radar, called out, "We've got company, 3 vessels inbound, fast." Alice's stomach churned. "Cross?" "No doubt about it," Sophie said, gripping her rifle. "They're bringing everything they've got." The freighter's captain veered toward the facility, but the incoming ships launched drones that buzzed overhead, their low hum filling the air. Moments later, the first missile streaked toward them. "Brace!" Sophie shouted as the missile struck the water nearby, sending a shockwave through the freighter. A tactical response. Sophie rallied the team as the freighter's crew fought to keep the ship steady. Tyler launched their remaining drones, using their countermeasures to scramble the attackers' targeting systems. "We need to split up," Sophie said. "Alice, you and Amir get to the facility and lock down the network. Tyler and I will hold them off." "I'm not leaving you behind," Alice protested. "You have to," Sophie insisted. "This is bigger than any of us." Reluctantly, Alice and Amir boarded a smaller vessel bound for the facility. Tyler handed Alice a portable comm device. "Stay in contact," he said, "and don't do anything crazy." The facility under siege. At the facility, Alice and Amir worked quickly to secure the core. The node glowed with steady light, its energy flowing smoothly through the network. But the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions reminded them how precarious their position was. Amir pulled up the network's security protocols. "We can isolate the core from external interference," he said. "But if they breach the facility, they could still destroy the equipment. Then we make it impossible for them to reach it," Alice said, her mind racing. "What about the defensive subroutine?" "It's active," Amir replied, "but it's not enough to stop a full assault." Alice looked at the glowing node, her jaw tightening. "Then we override it." Sophie's last stand. Meanwhile, Sophie and Tyler faced Cross's forces head-on. The contractors had deployed advanced weaponry and autonomous drones, their tactics ruthless and efficient. But Sophie's experience and Tyler's ingenuity kept them at bay. "Drone on your 6, Tyler shouted as he launched a countermeasure. Sophie turned and fired, taking out the drone with a single shot. "How many more of these things do they have?" she muttered. "Too many," Tyler said. "But if we can take out their lead ship, we might buy Alice and Amir the time they need." The Showdown. As Cross's forces advanced, Alice and Amir initiated the core's override. The chamber pulsed with energy, the node's light intensifying. The defensive subroutine activated, creating a barrier around the network. "We're locked in," Amir said. "No one's getting in or out." At that moment, Cross himself appeared, flanked by his elite team. He approached the chamber with calculated precision, his weapon trained on Alice. "You've done well, Dr. Hammond," he said, "but you're out of time. Step away from the console." Alice stood her ground. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Cross. The network isn't a toy, it's a lifeline." Cross's expression hardened. "A lifeline only if it's in the right hands. My hands. A sacrifice for the future." As Cross's team moved closer, Sophie and Tyler burst into the chamber, weapons drawn. A firefight erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. In the chaos, Amir completed the override, sealing the network's access to all but the Coalition's encrypted keys. "It's done," he shouted. "The network's secure." Cross realized he was outmatched, his forces dwindling. He turned to Alice, his voice venomous. "This isn't over." "No," Alice said, meeting his gaze. "It's just beginning." With the network safe, Sophie led the team in driving out the remaining contractors. Cross retreated, his plans in ruins for now. A hard-won victory. The team stood in the chamber, bruised but victorious. The network glowed steadily, a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos. "We did it," Alice said, her voice filled with relief. "For now," Sophie replied. "But Cross will be back, and so will others like him." "Let them come," Alice said. "We'll be ready." Chapter 34. A Blueprint for Unity. The international facility near the Atlantic hub was no longer just a symbol of hope. It had become the beating heart of humanity's efforts to safeguard the network. Representatives from around the globe gathered in the newly completed command center, its sleek design blending seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Dr. Alice Hammond stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding as she addressed the coalition. The holographic map of the network hovered above her, its interconnected nodes glowing steadily. "The network is stable, but our work isn't finished," she began. "This isn't just about protecting a system, it's about securing a future." The coalition had drafted a comprehensive framework for managing the network, focusing on 3 key pillars. 1. Transparency. All data and decisions related to the network would be accessible to the public, ensuring accountability and preventing misuse. 2. Global cooperation. The coalition would act as a neutral governing body with equal representation from nations, organizations, and scientific institutions. 3. Environmental restoration. The network's primary focus would be on reversing climate change, stabilizing ecosystems, and addressing the planet's most pressing environmental crises. Alice gestured to the map. "This is a tool for healing, not for control. If we treat it as anything else, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past." Rallying support. The room buzzed with discussions as delegates debated the finer points of the framework. Skepticism remained, particularly from nations with powerful corporate lobbies. A representative from India spoke up. "How do we ensure that smaller nations have a voice in this process? The network belongs to all of us, but history has shown that power tends to concentrate." Dr. Rachel Calloway, representing the Australian Antarctic Division, responded. That's why this coalition exists, to prevent any one entity from monopolizing the network. We must hold each other accountable. The delegates nodded, their expressions softening as the framework's intent became clear. A test of commitment. As the coalition finalized its plans, a new challenge arose. A massive hurricane had formed in the Atlantic, its trajectory threatening millions. The network, now stabilized, had the potential to redirect the storm, but using it in this way would be its first true test. Alice stood before the console, her team gathered around her. "This is our chance to prove what the network can do," she said. "But it's also a risk. If we fail, the backlash could destroy everything we've built." Captain Sophie Torrance placed a reassuring hand on Alice's shoulder. "We didn't come this far to play it safe. Let's show them what's possible." The network in action. The coalition worked together, pooling expertise and resources to implement the network's capabilities. Scientists analyzed weather patterns, engineers fine-tuned the energy flow, and communication teams kept the public informed. As the network activated, the crystalline nodes pulsed with light, their energy redirecting the hurricane's path. The storm veered away from populated areas, dissipating harmlessly over open water. The world watched in awe as the news spread. Headlines hailed the coalition's success, a new era of unity, the network's first victory, solidifying unity. The successful test solidified the coalition's credibility. Skeptics became allies, and nations that had hesitated joined the effort. The facility expanded, becoming a hub for innovation and collaboration. At a press conference, Alice addressed the world. "This network is a gift, a second chance, but it's up to us to use it wisely. Together, we've proven that unity can achieve the extraordinary. Let's not lose sight of that." Chapter 35, The Ripple Effect. A year had passed since the stabilization of the network and the formation of the coalition. The world, once on the brink of ecological collapse, had begun to heal. The network's nodes worked in harmony, regulating tectonic shifts, balancing oceanic currents, and reversing the damage wrought by centuries of industrialization. Dr. Alice Hammond stood on a balcony overlooking the Atlantic Hub facility, the ocean sparkling under the midday sun. The once dormant network had become a beacon of hope, its capabilities proving transformative in ways even she hadn't imagined. Environmental restoration. The network's impact on the environment was profound. Deserts that had been expanding for decades began to recede as rainfall patterns normalized. Coral reefs, previously bleached by rising ocean temperatures, showed signs of revival. Reports from around the globe painted a picture of renewal. The Amazon rainforest, reforestation projects, aided by the network's control of localized weather patterns, had accelerated the regrowth of lost ecosystems. The Arctic, ice levels had stabilized, halting the dramatic decline that had once seemed irreversible. Global agriculture, predictable weather cycles had reduced the risk of droughts and floods, ensuring food security for millions. Alice read these reports with a mix of pride and humility. The network was doing what it had been designed to do, but it was humanity's unity that had made it possible. Technological innovation. The coalition's work inspired a new wave of technological innovation. Researchers used the network's principles to develop energy systems that mimicked its efficiency, creating decentralized grids powered by renewable resources. "This is the future we should have been working toward all along," Amir Khan said during a presentation at the international facility. The network isn't just a tool for survival, it's a blueprint for sustainable progress. Tyler Reeve, now leading a team focused on drone integration with the network, added, "We're learning how to build systems that work with nature, not against it." A shift in global politics. The coalition had become a powerful force for diplomacy, its members committed to collaboration over competition. Wars fought over resources became rare, as the network ensured equitable access to water, energy, and arable land. Still, challenges remained. Nations that had resisted the coalition continued to voice concerns about autonomy and control. Alice, often acting as a mediator, worked tirelessly to address these fears. "The network doesn't belong to any one country," she reminded them. "It belongs to all of us." Education and awareness. One of the coalition's proudest achievements was the creation of educational programs to teach future generations about the network. Schools around the world incorporated lessons on sustainability, emphasizing the importance of balance and cooperation. "It's not enough to rely on the network," Alice said during a lecture to university students. "We must learn from it. The real legacy of this technology is the mindset it fosters, one of stewardship, not exploitation." The ghosts of the past. Despite the network's successes, the shadow of Elias Cross lingered. Reports of his activities surfaced periodically: covert operations, attempts to access dormant nodes, and alliances with rogue factions. "He's not done," Sophie Torrance warned during a coalition meeting. "And he's not the only one. There will always be those who see the network as a means to power." The coalition redoubled its security efforts, using advanced monitoring systems to protect the nodes and prevent unauthorized access. But the specter of conflict loomed, a reminder that vigilance was essential. A world transformed. As the anniversary of the network's activation approached, the coalition planned a global celebration. Events were held in cities across the world, highlighting the progress made and the work still to be done. Alice stood before a crowd at the Atlantic hub, her voice steady as she addressed the gathered leaders, scientists, and citizens. "This network isn't just a miracle of technology," she said. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we put aside our differences and work together. The challenges we face are great, but so is our potential." The applause that followed echoed across the facility, a symbol of humanity's resilience and determination. Chapter 36. A New Symbiosis. Humanity's relationship with the network had evolved into one of cautious stewardship. The once mysterious system was no longer feared, but understood as a partner in the planet's recovery. From sprawling metropolises to remote villages, the network's presence could be felt in daily life, though its influence remained subtle, almost invisible. Dr. Alice Hammond often found herself marveling at the transformation. What had begun as a desperate attempt to prevent catastrophe had blossomed into a global effort to redefine humanity's role on Earth. A balanced partnership. In regions where the network's nodes were active, communities had adapted their practices to align with its capabilities. Farmers in arid lands used localized weather control to ensure steady rains, while coastal cities employed the network's tidal regulation to guard against floods. "This isn't just about what the network does for us," said a farmer from Kenya during a coalition conference. "It's about how we work with it. We've learned to respect its limits and adjust our lives accordingly." Alice often visited these communities, observing how people had embraced the network. "It's humbling," she said to Captain Sophie Torrance during one such trip, "to see how adaptable and resilient humanity can be." Cultural shifts. The network's influence extended beyond science and technology, inspiring a cultural renaissance. Artists, musicians, and writers drew inspiration from its beauty and complexity, weaving its patterns and energy into their creations. An exhibit at a Paris museum showcased works that blended traditional techniques with designs derived from the network's symbols. "It's a celebration of connection," said the curator, "not just within the network, but among ourselves." In schools, children studied the network as part of their standard curriculum. Lessons emphasized not only its mechanics, but also its history and the philosophy of balance that guided its builders. The philosophy of balance. One of the most profound impacts of the network was its role in shaping global ethics. The coalition promoted a philosophy of balance, inspired by the builders' intent to create harmony between technology and nature. At a global summit, Dr. Rachel Calloway articulated this vision. "The network reminds us that progress and preservation aren't mutually exclusive. We can innovate without destroying. We can advance without leaving others behind." This philosophy began to influence policymaking, encouraging nations to prioritize sustainability and equity in their decisions. The challenges of dependency. While the network brought undeniable benefits, some warned against over-reliance. What if the system failed? What if humanity became complacent? Alice addressed these concerns during a coalition meeting. "The network is a tool, not a crutch. It's up to us to ensure that our progress doesn't depend solely on its functions. We must build resilience, both within ourselves and our systems." Programs were launched to develop backup technologies and train communities in traditional practices, ensuring that they could thrive even in the absence of the network. A universal language. As humanity's understanding of the network deepened, so did their appreciation for its creators. Scholars studied the symbols etched into the nodes, deciphering what they believed to be a universal language of harmony and connection. "It's more than a script," said a linguist during a coalition broadcast. "It's a philosophy, a way of seeing the world as an interconnected whole." Alice found herself drawn to these studies, often spending hours poring over translations. "The builders didn't just leave us a system," she said to Amir Khan one evening. "They left us a guide, a reminder of what we're capable of when we work together." Looking ahead, as humanity continued to integrate the network into their lives, they remained vigilant. The coalition's efforts to protect the nodes were ongoing, and the memory of Elias Cross's interference served as a constant reminder of the need for unity and caution. Yet, despite the challenges, a sense of hope prevailed. The network had given humanity more than a second chance. It had sparked a new way of thinking, one that valued collaboration over competition and balance over excess. Alice stood on the observation deck of the Atlantic hub, gazing out at the horizon. The setting sun bathed the ocean in hues of gold and crimson, its beauty a testament to the resilience of the planet and its people. "We're not just surviving," she said softly. "We're thriving." Chapter 37. The Builder's Legacy. The network's origins remained one of its greatest mysteries. Though its functionality had been deciphered and its impact felt across the planet, the identity and purpose of its creators, the enigmatic builders, continued to elude humanity. Dr. Alice Hammond, captivated by this lingering question, spearheaded an initiative to explore the ancient remnants of the network for clues. "If we're going to understand the network fully, we need to understand the people who created it," she said during a coalition meeting. The first expedition. The coalition authorized an expedition to a recently discovered site deep beneath the Indian Ocean, where an ancient node had been located. Unlike the active hubs, this node was dormant, its energy signatures faint but distinct. Alice led a team of researchers, including Amir Khan, whose expertise in the network's systems proved invaluable. "This node is old," Amir said as they descended in a specialized submersible. "Older than the others we've encountered. It might predate the network's activation." When they reached the site, they were stunned by its design. The node was encased in a crystalline structure, its surface etched with symbols unlike any they had seen before. The carvings seemed to depict not just technical schematics, but a narrative, one that hinted at the builder's intent. A story in symbols. The team spent days documenting and analyzing the carvings. As they pieced together the fragments, a story began to emerge. "The builders faced a crisis," Alice said during a briefing with the coalition. "Something threatened their civilization, possibly environmental collapse, much like what we faced. The network wasn't just a tool for survival, it was a response to that crisis." Amir pointed to one of the carvings, which depicted interconnected nodes surrounded by swirling patterns. "This suggests they saw the network as a living system, one that could adapt and evolve alongside their planet." "But why did they leave?" Sophie Torrance asked. "If the network was so vital, why abandon it?" "That's what we need to find out," Alice replied. The builders' departure. Further exploration uncovered evidence that the builders had deliberately deactivated parts of the network. "It wasn't abandonment," Amir said. "It was preservation. They scaled back the system to let their world heal naturally." This revelation raised new questions. Had the builders left because their mission was complete? Or had something forced them to retreat? Alice's gaze lingered on a series of carvings that depicted what looked like celestial phenomena, comets, solar flares, and other cosmic events. "Maybe their crisis wasn't entirely environmental," she mused. "It's possible they faced an external threat." A call to action. The team's findings reignited humanity's curiosity and sparked a new era of exploration. The coalition launched initiatives to locate and study dormant nodes, believing they held the key to understanding the builder's full legacy. Alice, reflecting on the journey so far, addressed the coalition during a summit. "The builders left us more than a network," she said. "They left us a message, a reminder of what we can achieve when we prioritize balance and unity. But their story isn't over, and neither is ours." Chapter 38. Reshaping the World. The The discoveries about the builders and the deeper understanding of the network sent ripples through every corner of society. News outlets called it the dawn of balance, a term that resonated with billions. The coalition's transparency and collaborative leadership had inspired a global movement, reshaping priorities, politics, and culture. Dr. Alice Hammond often found herself reflecting on the magnitude of these changes as she watched the network from the Atlantic hub. The hum of the stabilized nodes wasn't just a sound, it was a reminder that humanity had found a way forward, against all odds. Political realignment nations that had long been at odds began finding common ground in the face of the network's potential. Traditional rivalries were tempered as governments realized that survival depended on cooperation. Regional partnerships flourished, creating new alliances built on shared goals. For the first time in decades, the United Nations passed unanimous resolutions. The network has shown us that no problem is insurmountable if we tackle it together, said a delegate during a global summit. This isn't just a technological era, it's a diplomatic one. The coalition expanded its reach, establishing hubs in regions that had historically been marginalized. These efforts ensured that the benefits of the network were felt by all, bridging divides that once seemed insurmountable. Economic transformation. The global economy underwent a seismic shift as the network's influence grew. Fossil fuels, once the backbone of industrial power, became obsolete. Renewable energy sources, bolstered by the network's efficiency, powered even the most remote communities. Corporations that had resisted change were forced to adapt or perish. Many pivoted to industries focused on restoration and sustainability, driven by the coalition's strict regulations on resource use. The network's weather stabilization reduced the frequency of natural disasters, saving billions in recovery costs and allowing governments to redirect resources toward education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Cultural renaissance. The network's impact on the arts and humanities was profound. Artists, musicians, and writers drew inspiration from its intricate designs and the philosophical principles of balance it embodied. A new genre emerged, network art, featuring glowing installations and music composed to mimic the harmonic rhythms of the nodes. Schools adopted new curriculums that emphasized global citizenship, environmental stewardship, and the interconnectedness of all life. Children learn not only about the network's mechanics, but also about the philosophy of its builders. It's not just about preserving the planet, said a teacher in Nairobi during a broadcast. It's about creating a world where everyone feels connected to something greater. Environmental healing. The network continued to work wonders. In the Pacific, coral reefs flourished again, drawing marine life back to regions that had been barren for decades. Rivers that had run dry flowed once more, revitalizing ecosystems and communities. Perhaps most symbolically, the Amazon rainforest, once called the lungs of the earth, began to grow again. A coalition-funded initiative used the network to regulate rainfall and support reforestation efforts, reversing decades of deforestation. Seeing the Amazon thrive again is proof of what we can achieve, Alice said during a visit to the region. It's not just about what we've restored, it's about what we've learned. Humanity's new role. The philosophical shift inspired by the network was perhaps its most lasting impact. The builder's message of balance became a guiding principle, influencing decisions at every level of society. Books, films, and discussions explored the builder's legacy, questioning humanity's place in the universe and the responsibility that came with such knowledge. The network is a mirror, one philosopher wrote. It reflects both our potential and our flaws. It asks us, which will we choose to nurture? A watchful eye. Despite the progress, vigilance remained crucial. Cross and other dissenting forces hadn't disappeared, and the possibility of the network being misused lingered in the coalition's mind. Advanced monitoring systems were developed to ensure the network's integrity, and contingency plans were created to address future threats. Alice often thought of Elias Cross during moments of reflection. The network doesn't just need protectors, she said during a coalition meeting. It needs people who understand its purpose, people who can look beyond power and see its true potential. A unified planet. The coalition declared a global holiday to celebrate the anniversary of the network's stabilization. Events were held worldwide, bringing together people of all nations to commemorate the journey from crisis to unity. Alice stood on the observation deck of the Atlantic hub as fireworks lit up the night sky. Around her, representatives from the coalition's member nations joined in the celebration, their faces illuminated by the glow of the stabilized nodes. "We've come a long way," Sophie Torrance said, standing beside her. "But the real challenge is making sure we don't forget how we got here." Alice nodded. "It's not just about preserving the network. It's about preserving what it's taught us." Chapter 39, A Legacy Secured. The Atlantic hub hummed with life as dignitaries, scientists, and coalition members gathered to mark the 5th anniversary of the network's stabilization. The facility had grown into a beacon of innovation and diplomacy, its sleek architecture reflecting the unified effort that had emerged from humanity's darkest hour. Dr. Alice Hammond stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the ocean. The waves sparkled under the morning sun, a testament to the balance the network had restored. Around her, the hum of conversation carried a sense of hope and accomplishment. A milestone celebration. Inside the main hall, delegates from every continent mingled, their discussions focused on progress and shared goals. A holographic display showcased the network's achievements: reduced climate disasters, rebounding ecosystems, and a significant decline in global poverty. Amir Khan stood at the center of a small group, animatedly explaining the latest breakthroughs in understanding the network's algorithms. "It's like a living organism," he said. "It adapts, learns, and evolves. And the more we understand it, the more we realize how much we have to learn." Captain Sophie Torrance, now head of the coalition's Global Defense Division, surveyed the room with a sense of pride. "We've come a long way," she said to Tyler Reeve, who had taken on the role of technological coordinator for the network's security. "And we've got a long way to go," Tyler replied. "But at least now, we've got a fighting chance." Reflections and gratitude. As the event reached its climax, Alice took the stage to address the assembled crowd. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "5 years ago, we stood at the edge of a precipice," she said. "The countdown was ticking, the planet was failing, and divisions threatened to tear us apart. But we chose a different path. We chose unity. Today, we stand as proof that when humanity works together, there is no limit to what we can achieve." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But the network isn't just a tool for healing, it's a challenge, a reminder that balance is not a destination, but a journey. We must remain vigilant, not only for the network's protection, but for the ideals it represents." The audience erupted into applause, their faces reflecting the shared sense of purpose that had brought them together. A subtle mystery. As the celebration wound down, Alice retreated to the observation deck for a moment of solitude. Sophie joined her, leaning against the railing as they watched the sunset. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Sophie asked. Alice nodded. "The builders. Everything we've accomplished is built on their foundation, but there's still so much we don't know. Why they left, what they faced, whether they succeeded in their journey." Sophie tilted her head. "And whether they're still out there?" Alice didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held up her tablet, which displayed an incoming signal from one of the dormant nodes they had recently discovered. "It's faint," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and caution. "But it's there, a signal we haven't seen before." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Another piece of the puzzle?" "Or a whole new puzzle," Alice replied. Looking ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the glowing nodes of the network pulsed faintly in sync with the Earth's rhythms. The coalition had secured the network, restored balance, and laid the groundwork for a brighter future. Yet the mystery of the builders and the faint signal hinted at something larger, an invitation to continue the journey. Humanity had risen to the challenge, proving their resilience and unity. Now they stood ready to face whatever came next. Final scene. In the depths of space, a cluster of faint lights flickered against the void. Far from Earth, an ancient structure, eerily similar to the network's nodes, began to glow. The signal reached out, bridging the gap between two civilizations separated by time and distance. And on Earth, the network pulsed in reply.